Panting heavily in the darkness, an unseen figure struggles to catch his breath during a grueling ordeal. Desperate to prove his worth, the injured boy urges himself to hurry up and heal his agonizing wounds. He frantically attempts to cast a healing spell, realizing in a panic that he will surely die if he fails. The scene abruptly shifts to the daunting exterior of the SSS-Rank dungeon known as Yggdrasil's Labyrinth. This imposing structure proudly stands as one of the 7 hardest labyrinths in the entire world. These 7 unexplored dungeons are notorious among adventurers for housing dormant, legendary secret treasures. Having cleared an A-rank dungeon a month prior, a skilled party has finally earned the right to challenge this SSS-Rank labyrinth. The narrator reveals himself as a member of this elite A-rank adventuring party known as Gunkino Donghwa. Every single member of this distinguished party possesses exceptional capabilities and immense combat prowess. Among them is Fail, a powerful black mage rumored to carry the terrifying blood of an ancient witch. Slashing through weak monsters, the sword Saintus Himeno aggressively dual-wields blades enchanted with lightning and wind attributes. A massive, muscular defender charges forward, roaring as he unleashes devastatingly powerful attacks on the enemy horde. The fierce battle rages on, as the formidable party members brutally decimate their monstrous foes. Engulfed in fire and steel, the remaining monsters are swiftly overwhelmed by the party's relentless assault. Blood and debris scatter across the cavern floor as the heroes easily secure their bloody victory. Standing tall among the carnage is Loki, the genius leader who effortlessly excels in combat, magic, and strategy. Trailing pathetically behind these mighty warriors is the final, significantly less imposing member of the group. Ray Din Huel, the party's white mage and healer, is suddenly yelled at by his battle-hardened comrades. Suglenst barks angrily at Ray, commanding him to hurry up and cast a healing spell on Himeno's injured leg. Despite Himeno insisting the scratch isn't worth calling him over, Ray nervously rushes in to perform his duty. Focused entirely on his task, Ray desperately casts his healing magic over her incredibly minor wound. The spell successfully takes effect, but a dark shadow of physical exhaustion immediately washes over the young healer. Panting heavily on his hands and knees, Ray silently admits that he suffers from a fatal flaw as a white mage. His vision blurs violently as his weak body completely gives out from the sudden magical exertion. Ray collapses forward onto the ground, prompting a disgusted shriek from Himeno as she quickly dodges him. Hitting the stone floor hard, Ray laments his pathetic state and curses this as the worst day of his life. Sensing his distress, the party leader Loki steps in and gently offers the fallen healer a potion. Loki kindly asks if he is all right, while the groggy white mage struggles to process the unexpected generosity. Ray's eyes widen in sheer surprise as he stares blankly at the potion bottle in Loki's outstretched hand. Explaining that it is a fatigue recovery medicine, Loki warmly encourages Ray to drink it and feel better. Overwhelmed by guilt, Ray apologizes profusely for forcing the talented leader to waste a valuable item on him. Loki gazes silently down at the pathetic healer with an unreadable, chilling expression hiding behind his smile. Heavy silence stretches between them as the rest of the party casually watches the tense exchange unfold. The illusion of kindness shatters instantly as Loki coldly and quietly brands Ray a complete burden. Unaware of the true malice spoken, a naive party member loudly praises Loki for his superficial generosity. Loki immediately turns his attention away from Ray, coldly calling out to Suglenst instead. Commanding the others to ignore Ray, Loki tells him to rest while the white mage silently agonizes over his crippling flaw. Defeated and exhausted, Ray reveals his dark secret, noting that casting a single healing spell completely drains his magical power. Ray laments his severe limitations, explaining that his inability to heal more than once severely narrows their strategies and leaves him paralyzed when out of magic. He gloomily admits his combat power is pathetic compared to the others, lacking even the physical build to compensate. Despite his utter uselessness, he reflects on the baffling fact that Loki actually invited him to the party. Having finally recovered enough to walk, he admits he still doesn't understand the leader's true motives. Someone rudely interrupts his thoughts, loudly demanding to know if he can move yet. Pushing through his self-doubt, Ray eagerly announces he is fine and rushes to rejoin his comrades. He genuinely cherishes his place in the group, finding true happiness in the fact that Loki chose him. A party member aggressively sighs in annoyance, blatantly calling Ray an incredible inconvenience. Shifting focus, Loki passionately reminds everyone of their grand objective, to conquer Yggdrasil's labyrinth and seize the secret treasure on the lowest floor. Bursting with overconfidence, they naively assume this dungeon will be just as easy as their recent A-rank conquest. Oblivious to the impending doom, Ray anxiously vows to do his absolute best to avoid troubling the others. The ominous narrative jumps to floor 125, darkly teasing the true horror of an SSS-Rank dungeon. A terrifying realization strikes as someone viciously curses their dire situation. Panting heavily in exhaustion, they frantically realize the monsters here are absurdly powerful. possibly even exceeding S-Rank. Utter disbelief washes over the battered party as they struggle to process the overwhelming strength of their sudden enemies. Paralyzed by fear, a terrified member whimpers that they don't want to die in this horrific place. Confusion and panic intertwine as they desperately question why such monstrously strong creatures suddenly appeared on this specific floor. A tense, suffocating silence heavily hangs over the exhausted and cornered group. Fearing their wrath, Ray silently shrinks back, deliberately refusing to utter a single word. He acutely recognizes their extreme stress and desperately hopes to avoid becoming the target of their displaced anger. The heavy silence is abruptly broken when someone sharply calls out, trembling with dread. A member begs to retreat, absolutely terrified of what will happen if the monsters find them again. Suglinst furiously screams that he already knows they need to leave. He angrily snaps at his teammate for stating the obvious, demanding to know exactly how they plan to return safely. A grim realization sets in as they acknowledge how easily they breezed through the upper floors. They suddenly understand they have foolishly descended to a deadly depth, with no conventional way back up. Despair deepens as they admit their own raw power is no longer enough to secure a safe escape. Breaking the tension, a solemn voice declares they have no choice but to finally use a special method. A spark of sudden hope ignites as someone recalls the mysterious stone they found at the bottom of the A-Rank dungeon. Relief eagerly floods their faces as they realize this magical artifact is their ultimate ticket out. Loki calmly confirms the strategy, agreeing that it is their only viable escape route. The fabled item is dramatically revealed to be the immensely powerful teleport stone. The narrator confirms their desperate decision to use this incredibly rare trump card. The artifact's fatal flaw is heavily explained, warning that its immense teleportation magic completely vanishes after a single use. The scene focuses on the heavy gravity of sacrificing such an irreplaceable and potent item. They nervously calculate their stock, confirming they have exactly 5 stones, enough to save the entire group despite their massive financial value. The narrative philosophically notes that when forced to weigh money against survival, one never hesitates to choose life. It boldly declares that a person's life will eternally hold far more absolute value than any precious treasure. Amidst the tense planning, Loki cryptically mutters that it is finally about time. Startled by the ominous tone, a party member confusedly echoes his strange statement. A profound realization hits Ray as he closely observes his leader's tactical movements. He correctly deduces that Loki is desperately attempting to advance as far as possible before executing a strategic retreat. Marveling at this brilliant foresight, the humble healer admits he would have foolishly wasted the potion immediately if he were in charge. Staring in pure awe, Ray firmly believes that his leader is an undeniably amazing person. His deep admiration shatters instantly when Loki coldly turns and declares that Ray is permanently banished from the party. A stunned Ray can only utter confused gasps as the devastating words slowly process in his mind. Completely frozen in sheer disbelief, the young healer stares blankly ahead at his imposing comrades. A teammate harshly demands to know why he is spacing out, while Ray internally questions if he actually heard the word banished. Loki cruelly asks if the pathetic healer failed to hear his crystal-clear declaration of exile. Stammering defensively, Ray confirms he heard the order but desperately begs to know the reason behind this sudden betrayal. Suddenly, a vicious physical blow strikes the defenseless boy without any warning. Crying out in agony, the frail white mage is violently sent crashing onto the hard dungeon floor. Looking down on him with absolute disdain, his former comrades ask if they genuinely need to spell out his obvious flaws. Groaning in pain, Ray is forced to listen as they ruthlessly mock his annoying and slow-witted nature. Stepping forward, the sword saintess Himeno fiercely accuses him of constantly staring at her during their intense battles. She disgustedly brands him a total pervert for his lingering gaze. As Rhea tries to frantically defend himself, another party member outrageously accuses him of trying to peek under her skirt. Panicking, he desperately explains that he was only monitoring everyone's combat movements so he could quickly heal their deep wounds. The visual memory flashes back, highlighting his frantic attempts to keep up with the chaotic and rapid pace of the battlefield. His completely logical defense falls on deaf ears as the female party members glare at him with unchecked malice. Towering over the fallen healer, the mighty leader Loki stares down with cold and completely unfeeling eyes. Loki ruthlessly breaks down Ray's tactical uselessness, citing his inability to move after casting a single spell as an unbearable burden against strong monsters. Trembling under the crushing truth of those words, Ray weakly admits that his magical power runs out entirely too easily. Clawing for any shred of worth, Ray frantically lists how he compensated for his combat weakness by gathering dungeon intel, analyzing enemy weak points, and single-handedly doing all the camp chores. In response to his desperate plea for validation, Loki merely lets out an exasperated and heavy sigh. Scowling deeply, the leader remarks that Ray clearly fails to understand the massive expectations placed upon their elite group. Loki grandly declares that their party is destined to defeat the world-threatening demon lord. A holy mission, personally backed by the king's high expectations. He chillingly points out the sheer absurdity of carrying a completely useless white mage on such a legendary quest. Turning his back on the discarded healer, Loki finalizes his harsh judgment by stating the party would have no future with Rei. Crushed by the absolute rejection, Rei whispers his own crippling lack of power back to himself in pure despair. A desperate and lingering question echoes in his mind as he tearfully wonders why he was ever chosen by them in the first place. The traumatic memories of his dark and miserable past slowly begin to resurface in his shattered mind. His thoughts drift back to the harsh reality he faced when he was merely 11 years old. Haunted by the bitter memory, he questions why the great Loki ever bothered to purchase him when he was nothing but a lowly slave. Clinging to a desperate glimmer of hope, he tries to convince himself that there must have been a meaningful reason behind his recruitment. Struggling to voice his intense inner turmoil, the broken boy looks up at his former master. Gathering his last ounce of fleeting courage, Rei openly asks Loki why he ever chose him. Sighing at the sheer stupidity of the question, Loki mocks his former teammate's pathetic desire to protect his place in the group. The cruel leader shatters the boy's final illusions, explaining there was absolutely no deep meaning aside from wanting a cheap slave who could heal. Leaving Rei utterly devastated, Loki coldly admits he would have bought absolutely anyone back when he was just a poor E-rank adventurer looking for a bargain. Loki declares he doesn't want someone useless like Rei ever again, noting that not just anyone will do for the role. Loki explains that as an elite A-rank party, they can choose any adventurer they want, and vows to find a proper white mage. Rei stares in shock. Realizing the dire consequences of this conversation, Rei panics internally, realizing he is genuinely about to be banished from the party. He connects the dots, terrified that Loki's timing means they intend to leave him behind in the dungeon. Rei figures out that Loki doesn't even want to waste a precious teleport stone to get him out. Desperate, Rei begs Loki not to abandon him, pleading that he doesn't want to die. Thrashing in panic, Rei screams that he will surely die if they leave him behind. Trembling violently, he begs for another chance to redeem himself and promises to do better than ever. Loki pauses thoughtfully, seemingly considering whether to grant the pathetic healer a second chance. Shocking Rei, Loki brutally demands that the healer cure a fresh wound right now to prove himself. Without warning, a devastating attack is unleashed against the defenseless white mage. Rei screams in absolute agony as blood erupts from the vicious strike across his body. Writhing on the ground, Rei cries out in pain while Loki coldly mocks him to heal or die. Suglenst and Himeno burst into cruel laughter, highly amused by Loki's sadistic test. Choking on his own blood, Rei desperately gasps for air as his life slips away. A grim silence falls over the dungeon floor as Rei's mangled body lies nearly motionless. Refusing to give up, he forces his trembling, blood-soaked hand upward, grabbing his heavily bleeding chest. Rei struggles against the fading light. With a horrific groan, he summons the last of his strength to perform a desperate spell. Panting heavily, Rei miraculously manages to cast his healing magic on himself. A bright, warm light completely envelops his mutilated torso to knit the wounds. The blinding magic rapidly heals his torn flesh back together in a burst of power. Loki observes the flawlessly repaired skin, coldly noting that Rei's healing speed is his only redeeming quality. Exhausted from the spell's immense toll, Rei pants heavily on the ground. Refusing to give up, he slowly pushes himself off the cold stone floor. Rei tells himself he cannot simply collapse from exhaustion like he usually does. Staggering to his feet, he is determined to stand up and prove his worth to the team. Phil watches in mild surprise, noting it is amazing Rei can even move after exhausting his magic. Then trembling wildly, Rei looks up and asks if his desperate effort was good enough to stay. Loki raises a hand thoughtfully, preparing to deliver his final verdict to the hopeful healer. Suddenly kicking Rei viciously in the face, Loki laughs and asks if the idiot really thought they would take him. Loki coldly declares this the perfect opportunity to cast Rei away, refusing to waste a precious magic stone on him. Bidding a final goodbye to the crushed healer, Loki turns his back to leave with the rest of the party. The party laughs sadistically as Suglenst tosses a small knife back to Rei, cruelly joking about him surviving with it. Their wicked laughter echoes through the cavern as they officially abandon him in the deadly labyrinth. Left completely alone, Rei glares at the ground and bitterly curses his cruel fate. He reaches out and clutches the small, pathetic knife they tossed at him like garbage. Tears of frustration well up in his eyes as he questions why this horrific tragedy is happening to him. Crushed by betrayal, Rei laments that he has endured all kinds of terrible treatment for absolutely nothing. A faint glimmer of light struggles to pierce the overwhelming darkness of the desolate dungeon. Thinking back on his desperate efforts, Rei laments that he endured everything just to protect his place in the party. Staring into the void, he bitterly questions why his immense sacrifices were completely ignored. His grim introspection is violently interrupted by the terrifying appearance of a monstrous creature. A grotesque beast looms over his paralyzed body. radiating pure malice and hunger. Panicking wildly, Ray curses his useless muscles as he desperately tries to move his paralyzed body. Overwhelmed by sheer despair, he breaks into a hollow, broken laugh in the face of death. Staring up at the monster, he wonders why he constantly has to endure such relentless suffering. Flashes of tragedy plague his mind as he remembers the horrific day monsters slaughtered his family. He painfully recalls how that tragic loss forced him into a miserable life as a slave. Remembering the endless physical abuse he endured as a punching bag, he reflects on how Loki eventually bought his freedom. Staring death in the face, the broken healer questions what the true meaning of his miserable life really is. The ravenous monster opens its jaws wide, fully preparing to devour its helpless prey. With a heavy sigh, Ray closes his eyes and accepts his grim fate. Surrendering to the inevitable, he mocks his own pitiful existence one last time. Suddenly, a strange, echoing noise sharply pierces through the heavy dungeon silence. Startled by the unexpected sound, Ray faintly recognizes a mysterious voice echoing in his mind. A cheerful voice playfully demands an answer, leaving Ray completely bewildered as to who is speaking. The upbeat voice cheerfully greets him, casually noting that he is finally awake. Opening his eyes in absolute shock, Ray is stunned to see a young girl standing right in front of him. Utterly baffled by the impossible sight, he frantically questions why a girl is deep inside this deadly labyrinth. Tilting her head, the girl huffs aggressively and asks why he is staring at her like that. Crossing her arms confidently, she states that she obviously looks like a normal girl and demands his absolute acknowledgement. Flustered, Ray admits she is cute, prompting her to immediately assume he is completely enchanted by her beauty. Preening under his awkward compliment, she smugly encourages him to praise her even more. Ignoring her antics, Ray frantically begs to know what floor they are on and why she is wandering the dungeon. Calmly brushing off his panic, the mysterious girl states she can reveal their location, but not her reasons for being there. She drops a bombshell revelation, cheerfully declaring that they are on the 200th floor, the absolute lowest level of Yggdrasil's labyrinth. Horrified by the terrifying truth, Ray repeats her words as the reality of the lowest floor sets in. Despair crashes over him once again as he realizes it will be totally impossible to escape this deep down. Noting his sudden dread, the girl stares at him curiously and casually asks if he actually wants to leave. Pondering the situation, she confidently tells him that leaving should be easy since he obtained the secret treasure. Stunned by the ridiculous claim, Ray frantically asks what she means by him obtaining a secret treasure. Leaning in closely, she asks if he can feel the immense aura of the Yggdrasil surging through his body. Staring at him with an intense gaze, the girl bluntly declares that he has already been cursed by the Yggdrasil. Pointing directly at his face, she reveals that his rotting left eye is absolute proof of the curse taking hold. Frantically grabbing his face, Ray panics and begs her to explain the terrifying nature of this curse. Smirking in triumph, she reveals that his magic circuit is now connected to Yggdrasil, granting him unlimited magic power. Reeling from the sudden revelation, Ray questions the nature of his newfound unlimited magic and the ominous curse of Yggdrasil. Staring at the mysterious figure before him in the darkness, he demands to know her true identity. Pointing playfully to herself, the young girl cheerfully introduces her name as Norn. Startled by a sudden sense of familiarity, Ray repeats her name in quiet disbelief. Noticing his deep confusion, Norn pauses her explanation and decides to demonstrate the situation instead. Assessing his white mage attire, she confidently challenges Ray to cast a healing spell on himself. Hesitating awkwardly, the anxious healer stammers out a weak excuse to avoid using his magic. Tilting her head in pure curiosity, Norn patiently asks the nervous boy what exactly is wrong. Ashamed of his fatal flaw, Ray explains that casting a single heal spell drains all his magic and leaves him paralyzed from exhaustion. A moment of quiet tension passes between the two as they stand in the cavernous depths of the labyrinth. Ignoring his terrified protests, Norn pats his shoulder and playfully insists he try casting the spell anyway. Yielding to her strange confidence, Ray nervously agrees and braces his fragile body for the inevitable collapse. Squeezing his eyes shut, he reluctantly channels his inner energy and successfully casts the healing spell. Gasping in absolute shock, Ray realizes his body hasn't collapsed while Norn casually asks how he feels. Staring at his shaking hands, the stunned boy realizes he doesn't feel fatigued in the slightest. Overwhelmed by the impossible reality, he marvels at the fact that his magic reserves are no longer empty. Chuckling mysteriously in the shadows, Norn notes that his lack of exhaustion is only the beginning. She proudly points out that he can currently feel his entire body overflowing with an immense amount of magic. Ray repeats her words in sheer awe as she reveals this endless energy is the actual magic power of Yggdrasil. Explaining the mechanics of his new body, Norn states that his magical circuit is now directly connected to the World Tree T. She details how magic normally flows from a core that cannot easily be fixed by standard healing spells. Detailing the effects of the curse, Norn explains that reaching this domain caused his magical core to switch from his left eye directly to Yggdrasil. Putting the pieces together, Ray excitedly realizes his magic will never deplete as long as the world tree supplies it. Smiling brightly, Norn confirms that he can now use this unlimited magic power as much as he desires. Despite the incredible news, a lingering doubt suddenly causes Ray to pause and question the situation. Eager to understand his altered body, he passionately admits his burning curiosity to the highly amused girl. Desperate for answers, he asks what exactly caused him to become physically tethered to the legendary tree. Staring intently at his strange savior, Ray presses Norn on why she specifically referred to his miraculous condition as a curse. Gesturing for him to follow, Norn leads him away and reveals that a nearby spring holds the answers to his questions. She explains that he accidentally swallowed the restorative spring water when he washed ashore, and she pulled his floating body out, revealing its true identity as the world tree's tears. Norn proudly declares the resurrection spring to be one of Yggdrasil's legendary secret treasures. Stunned by his incredible luck behind him, she casually identifies the tree he was leaning against as the dungeon's core. Looking up in absolute awe, Ray finally recognizes the colossal structure as the legendary world tree itself. Stunned by his incredible luck, he realizes he has somehow fallen to the unexplored lowest floor that every adventurer desperately seeks. Connecting the dots, Ray concludes that the miraculous spring water generating his unlimited power is the dungeon's ultimate hidden treasure. Overwhelmed by the sheer scale of his discovery, the young mage marvels at the true power hidden within the SSS-Rank labyrinth. Reacting with comical shock, Norn completely shatters the tension by incredulously asking if her personal garden is actually ranked SSS. Finally grasping his own miraculous survival, Ray shifts his focus and begins to deeply wonder about this bizarre girl calling a deadly labyrinth her garden. Keeping her secrets close, Norn cryptically states she can reveal their current floor, but refuses to explain why she is down here. Turning to face his mysterious savior, Ray gently asks if Norn has been surviving completely alone in this desolate dungeon all this time. Refusing to reveal her true motives, the mysterious girl offers instead to disclose their current dungeon floor. Astonished by her presence, Ray asks Norn if she has genuinely been surviving alone without any other humans around. Beaming with fierce confidence, Norn cheerfully confirms her solitude while boasting that she is much stronger than she appears. Struggling to process her bold claim, Ray skeptically admits that while age doesn't strictly define power, it remains hard to believe. Norn defensively calls out his obvious doubt, while Ray silently notes her 12-year-old appearance completely contradicts the dungeon's age restriction. Refusing to accept his skepticism, Norn proudly declares her ability to instantly slaughter S-rate monsters that would effortlessly crush his former party. Annoyed by his disbelief, Norn correctly assumes Ray simply wants to escape to the surface anyway. A heavy silence falls between them as Ray wordlessly processes her shockingly accurate assessment. Norn bluntly explains that breaking out to the outside world requires the absolute defeat of those terrifying S-rate monsters. Crippled by immense self-doubt, Ray hopelessly admits that his limited skills as a white mage make escape completely unimaginable. A sudden wave of uncertainty hits him as he questions what he would even do if he miraculously reached the surface. Dark memories flood his mind as he distinctly remembers being cruelly banished from his only party. The crushing weight of isolation fully sets in as he quietly confirms the devastating reality of his situation. Overcome with quiet despair, Ray solemnly realizes he no longer possesses a single place to return to. He numbly accepts the painful truth that he has absolutely nothing left waiting for him in the outside world. An unexpected sense of peace gently washes over him as he considers the possibility of simply staying in the dungeon forever. He genuinely wonders if spending his remaining days down here until death might actually become his happiest life tune. Gripping his clothes tightly, a bittersweet realization hits him that he can no longer save anyone else. Noticing his rapidly shifting demeanor, Norn pauses as Ray tentatively prepares to speak. Catching the young girl completely off guard, he directly asks if there is any chance he could just live there with her. Stunned by the abrupt question, Norn stammers out a hesitant confirmation while trying to comprehend his choice. Total shock visibly overtakes her face as she loudly questions if he genuinely plans to stay in the lethal labyrinth. Flustered and confused, she furiously reminds him that he had just expressed a strong desire to leave. Bowing his head respectfully, Ray apologizes for his fickle nature and firmly reiterates his strange request to live there. Reluctantly accepting his sudden shift, Norn agrees to his terms, just as Ray curiously asks what they will eat. Surprising him once again, she bluntly states that consuming food is entirely unnecessary in this mystical place. She explains that Yggdrasil's immense magic naturally supplies all bodily nutrition and rapidly heals minor injuries, essentially granting them near immortality. Utterly stunned by this overwhelming revelation, Ray struggles to mentally process the sheer scale of the dungeon's power. He loudly questions the absurd concept of true immortality as shock ripples through his weakened body. Norn quickly clarifies the limits of their endurance, warning him that a clean beheading would still result in instant death. She further reveals that his minor injuries had already naturally healed before he even cast his spell. Proving her incredible point, suddenly adopting a deadly serious tone, Norn sharply reminds him that his current pathetic weakness makes him nothing more than easy monster food. Acknowledging the harsh reality of their deadly environment, Ray steels his resolve and promises to fight for his survival. Pleased with his newfound determination, Norn enthusiastically orders him to follow her so she can teach him the crucial basics. Walking closely behind his new mentor, Ray internally vows to grow strong enough to never burden her. Ignited with fiery conviction, he powerfully declares his absolute intent to become stronger. The narrative dramatically leaps forward, 3 entire years, establishing their ongoing survival deep within Floor 180. A sharp, violent cracking sound abruptly shatters the silence as intense action suddenly kicks off. Dust and debris fiercely explode into the air from a devastating, unseen impact against the dungeon walls. A massive, terrifying monster viciously roars through the chaotic dust cloud, signaling the start of a brutal battle. A sharp hissing sound suddenly echoes through the air as the intense battle reaches its climax. The deafening silence hangs heavy over the dungeon as the dust finally begins to settle on the destroyed battlefield. Ray stands amidst the rubble, silently surveying the gruesome aftermath of his grueling fight. His exhausted body trembles. From the sheer physical toll of the brutal and unrelenting encounter, looking down at the ground, a deeply remorseful Ray softly murmurs a quiet apology into the void. The heavy weight of his past failures briefly flashes across his weary and battered expression. A sudden soft thud interrupts his dark thoughts as he firmly shifts his combat stance. Clenching his fists, he groans through the pain and victoriously declares that he has finally defeated the monstrous beast. Looking up with a triumphant shout, he excitedly calls out to Norn to announce his incredible victory. Acknowledging his momentous achievement, Norn responds with a simple and approving grunt. Deeply impressed by his growth, she warmly remarks that his massive transformation makes him seem like a completely different person. She proudly confirms that he single-handedly slayed the Shadow Viper, the terrifying lord of the 180th floor. Ree eagerly explains how he enhanced his body and knife with Yggdrasil's magic power before directly releasing it into his opponent's system. Acknowledging his newfound combat skill, Norn praises his massive improvement compared to when he first started his grueling training 3 years ago. Shuddering slightly at the memory, Ray admits he genuinely does not want to recall those dark and humiliating times. A grimace crosses his face as he reiterates his deep reluctance to look back on his earlier, pathetic struggles. Norn bluntly reminds him that he used to constantly get killed by a mere small-sized monster back then. Awkwardly trailing off, Ray desperately searches for a way to defend his past weakness. Stammering slightly, he defensively points out that even though the monster was small, it was still incredibly dangerous. He justifies his endless struggles by explaining that the creature was an S-rate arc rabbit, and he would have died permanently without the secret treasure's power. He proudly credits his half-immortal body and unlimited heals from Yggdrasil for allowing him to accumulate vital combat experience through endless trial and error. Bragging slightly about his progress, he notes that repeatedly switching his magic circuit to restore lost body parts drastically increased his overall healing efficiency. Astonished by his rapid growth, Norn admits she originally expected it to take him 100 years to reach this level instead of a mere 3 heims. Smirking proudly at her powerful student, she teasingly labels Ray as quite a monster himself. Ray gratefully thanks her for the compliment while humbly insisting that his incredible progress is solely due to her excellent teaching. Laughing heartily at his deference, Norn brushes off his praise and tells him there is absolutely no need to be so humble. Suddenly, the cheerful atmosphere abruptly shifts as a serious and heavy tension falls over the conversation. Her tone turning icy cold, Norn bluntly shatters his confidence by declaring that he is still fundamentally weak. Taken completely aback by the sudden harsh criticism, Ray stares at her in sheer, silent confusion. A dark, haunting visual suddenly flashes before his eyes, breaking his focus and leaving him momentarily paralyzed in fear. Noticing his deeply troubled expression, Norn concernedly asks if he just experienced another terrifying illusion. Ray softly confesses that ever since arriving in the labyrinth, he has been sporadically hallucinating a child version of himself. Norn theorizes that this disturbing phenomenon is a dangerous side effect of connecting with Yggdrasil, the tree of life that accumulates all living souls. Trembling slightly with realization, Ray notes that this childish phantom seems to only appear whenever he is hovering on the absolute brink of death. Norn warns that the lingering thoughts of the dead might be mixing with his supplied magic power, actively trying to drag his life into the void. Staring intently into his eyes, she strictly commands him to be incredibly careful and not let the darkness swallow him whole. Gripping his weapon tightly with newfound resolve, Ray solemnly agrees to heed her dark and ominous warning. Staring off into the empty distance, he thoughtfully mutters to himself that 3 entire years have already passed in this dungeon. Surprised by his sudden melancholic reflection, Norn tilts her head and curiously asks what brought this topic up out of the blue. Smiling softly at her companion, she teasingly asks if his cute side is finally showing, because he is starting to miss the outside world. Laughing nervously, the young man awkwardly attempts to brush off a sudden thought. He candidly explains to his companion that it feels like time has flown by, marveling that it has already been 3 years since they first met. Reflecting on his immense growth, he notes that he spent those 3 years desperately surviving Norn's harsh training to effortlessly defeat SSS-Rank monsters. Acknowledging the brutal reality of his journey, he admits that although he almost died many times, the struggle was necessary. Intrigued by his sudden pause, the female warrior named Norn looks up and prompts him to continue. Filled with sudden excitement, he confidently realizes that he has finally become strong enough to survive in this deadly environment. Suddenly losing his footing, mid-action, he lets out a startled gasp as his body helplessly tips over, tumbling awkwardly to the ground. He completely ruins the serious, triumphant atmosphere he had just built up. A sharp voice instantly scolds him, aggressively yelling at him not to look away in the middle of a fight. Groaning in sheer pain from the impact, he lies paralyzed while a stern presence looms over him. Sighing in sheer disappointment, Norn bluntly remarks that she genuinely believed he had grown stronger over the years. Crossing her arms critically, she firmly declares that his embarrassing blunder proves he is still far too naive. Desperately defending his pathetic slip-up, he mutters that absolutely any man would have looked away in that exact, distracting situation. He stubbornly repeats his weak excuse, trying in vain to justify his momentary lapse in battle concentration. Awkwardly shifting the uncomfortable topic, he gazes upward and casually comments that the stars are much clearer today. A beautiful, expansive view of a glowing, starlit sky stretches out magnificently above them within the cavern. Silently taking in the breathtaking view, he allows the peaceful atmosphere to temporarily wash away the tension of their training. Breaking the sudden silence, he asks Norn if she was always alone, prompting her to explain that normal humans rarely reach this deep into the dungeon. Agreeing with her assessment, he notes that the monsters lurking down here possess terrifying strength that dwarfs anything found outside the labyrinth chem. He solemnly reflects that he had to die countless times just to defeat an SSS-Rank monster, acknowledging that raw magic power alone cannot guarantee survival. When he casually asks if she ever wants to leave the dungeon, Norn drops a shocking revelation by stating she cannot leave. Completely stunned by her unexpected confession, he repeats her words in sheer, bewildered disbelief. Norn quickly clarifies that despite her immense strength and the comfort of the dungeon, she would have left long ago if she actually had the freedom to do so. A heavy, contemplative silence immediately falls between the two warriors as the tragic weight of her eternal captivity fully sinks in. Breaking the thick tension, she turns her gaze away and stares off into the dark cavern with a quiet, wistful expression. With a subtle hint of longing in her voice, she finally admits that she truly desires to see the world outside the dungeon. Quickly turning the spotlight back on him, she asks if he has any lingering goals or unfulfilled desires waiting in the outside world. She gently presses him to search his feelings and figure out if there is any unfinished business anchoring him to his past. Caught completely off guard by her probing question, he lowers his eyes and plunges into deep, silent thought. Muttering quietly to himself, he frantically searches his own heart to find a genuine reason to ever return to the surface. He coldly realizes he has zero desire to rejoin his abusive former party, noting that only a lingering sense of hatred and frustration remains within his soul. Questioning his past suicidal despair, he wonders what else he truly has left to live for, as Norn gently calls out his name. Pushing him even deeper, Norn asks if there is absolutely anyone special he desperately wants to reunite with on the outside. Her piercing question strikes a deep chord, forcing the young man to fully confront the painful, hollow reality of his complete isolation. Suddenly snapping him out of his dark trance, Norn loudly shouts his name with sharp, urgent energy. Flinching in pure surprise, his eyes widen drastically as he is violently ripped back to the present moment. Taken completely aback by her sudden intensity, he stammers her name in a state of flustered confusion. Staring back at her, with newfound, unbreakable determination, he boldly declares that he is finally going to leave the dungeon and return to the outside world. Reflecting on his painful past before joining Gunkino Dongwa, Ray recalls Nenamoa, a fellow slave with red hair and a distinct mole near her eye. Because they were around the same age, they formed a close bond while suffering at the slave trader's mansion. Sticking constantly by her side during their captivity, Ray affectionately called her Nene. Sitting together in the bleak darkness, the two young slaves found solace in each other's company. Whenever the cruel slave traders violently beat them to relieve stress, Nene would bravely act like a protective big sister. Throwing herself into harm's way, she would shield the younger boy from their captor's brutal physical abuse. Turning her bruised face toward him, she offered a reassuring presence amidst the horrific beatings. Despite the relentless abuse, she would always respond with the exact same comforting words whenever a crying Rei asked if she was okay. Smiling warmly, Nene promised to protect him, while playfully asking him to save her if she ever found herself in trouble. Burdened by his fate to be sold, Rei felt entirely helpless and believed there was no way he could ever save her. Deeply touched by her unconditional affection, he was certain she knew his helplessness, but chose to show him constant kindness anyway. Gazing thoughtfully into the distance, Rei silently reflects on his complete powerlessness during his time as a slave. Repeating his somber thoughts, he remembers how weak and incapable he was back then. Becoming an adventurer ultimately did nothing to change his inability to fulfill that childhood promise. Clenching his fist with newfound resolve, Rei confidently declares that he might finally be able to fulfill his vow. Empowered by Yggdrasil's endless magic, he resolves to find her and use his newfound strength to solve her problems. 5 months later, Rei is steadily advancing towards the exit, with Norn's invaluable help in order to escape Yggdrasil's labyrinth. His singular, driving motivation to survive the deadly dungeon is to finally reunite with Nenemoa. Trudging alongside his mysterious companion, Rei navigates the massive, cavernous depths of the labyrinth. Snapping out of his deep thoughts, Rei notices a familiar environment and casually asks Norn about their current floor. Pointing out their location, Norn plainly informs him that they are currently traversing the 125th floor. Processing the high floor number, Rei realizes with dismay that their grueling journey is not even halfway finished. Exhausted by the severe mental toll, he complains that the journey is draining even if Yggdrasil's magic completely prevents physical fatigue. Norn nonchalantly reminds the frustrated boy that she already warned him it would take at least 2 years to reach the exit. Reflecting on the past 5 months of single-mindedly aiming for the exit, Rei notes that he has been forced to handle almost all the fighting, barely dodging a massive monster's attack. He recalls Norn claiming that these deadly battles are merely part of his training. While complaining that she unfairly refuses to participate, he admits she always steps in to save him when he is in genuine danger. Staring up at his companion, he frustratingly notes that she actually finds it highly entertaining to watch him struggle against the labyrinth's enemies. Panting heavily, Rei tries to catch his breath after enduring yet another grueling battle for survival. Complaining about her attitude, Rei wishes she would just save him instead of laughing, recalling an embarrassing incident on the 160th floor. Greatly amused by his annoyance, Norn argues that constantly stepping in to save him would completely ruin his training arm. Smiling gently, she adds that she can laugh easily now because he has grown genuinely strong during their journey. Touched by her rare and genuine compliment, Rei looks at Norn with wide-eyed surprise. Instantly ruining the moment, Norn teases him about how desperately he washed his saliva-covered clothes, sending Rei into a flustered panic. Eager to change the subject, Norn suddenly points out an abandoned bag lying on the ground ahead of them. Hoping it contains clean clothes, she suggests he change so he doesn't look terrible going outside, covered in blood and monster saliva. Sniffing himself in concern, Rei agrees he needs a better appearance. But he suddenly pauses as he takes a closer look at the bag. Staring in absolute disbelief, he recognizes the item and miraculously realizes it is actually his own missing bag. Finally understanding why the area felt so familiar, Rei realizes he had mistakenly thought Loki took the bag with him. Standing solemnly before a massive edge, he realizes with chilling clarity that this is the exact spot where he fell into the abyss. A massive shout of absolute disbelief violently shatters the surrounding silence. Norn viciously berates Rei for grossly underestimating Yggdrasil's labyrinth, absolutely shocked that he brought absolutely nothing useful in his bag, not even a change of clothes. Standing in stunned and incredibly awkward silence, Rei genuinely has no idea how to respond to her harsh criticism. A sudden, sharp realization immediately snaps their attention away from the one-sided argument. Rei violently gasps in shock as a deeply familiar and utterly terrifying monster suddenly appears before him. Staring down the imposing beast, Rei coldly remarks that they have finally met again. Curious about his strange reaction, Norn quickly asks if he actually knows this specific monster. Rei casually admits that they just happened to violently run into each other. He confidently finishes his thought, confirming their brutal history from a previous deadly encounter. Directly addressing the beast, despite knowing it cannot understand him, Rei boldly declares that he is no longer the same weak person. He firmly asserts his immense growth since their last battle, fully readying himself for the inevitable clash. A swift, decisive foot taps against the hard ground as movement instantly initiates. Analyzing the immediate threat, Rei mentally notes this monster is incredibly tough, but slower than the Shadow Viper. Landing a remarkably shallow initial strike, he quickly deduces that the creature's formidable toughness is completely restricted to its hardened outer shell. Utilizing his newfound speed, Rei seamlessly maneuvers around the lumbering beast to find a highly vulnerable opening. Preparing for a devastating counterattack, he takes a deep, highly focused inhale to aggressively channel his surging energy. He immediately launches a blindingly fast and incredibly explosive attack straight at the monster. The immense kinetic force of the powerful blow violently tears right through the creature's dense physical defenses. Unable to withstand the sheer magical power, the massive monster completely disintegrates into a cloud of chaotic dust. The heavy dust slowly settles as Ray flawlessly completes his lethal and fluid combat sequence. Letting out a long sigh of immense relief, Ray excitedly turns and asks Norn exactly how he performed in the fight. Eager for her direct validation, he loudly calls out her name once again. Shifting to a surprisingly solemn tone, Norn gently advises Ray to make some genuine friends once he finally escapes to the outside world. Struggling to fully articulate her sudden emotional sentiment, she notes his reckless nature and urgently implores him to find truly trustworthy companions. Utterly confused by her completely out-of-the-blue request, Ray hesitantly agrees, despite harboring deep doubts about his own personal ability to make friends. Norn enthusiastically cheers him on, warmly encouraging him to just do his absolute best out there. Smiling softly with profound wisdom, she reminds him that people simply cannot live alone, prompting a lighthearted chuckle from Ray. A heavy, intensely poignant pause hangs in the quiet air as he gently calls out her name in response. Norn heartbreakingly explains that he has a very long life ahead and desperately needs friends to laugh with, just in case she is no longer around to protect him. A sudden, violently panicked reaction instantly flashes across Ray's terrified face. Desperately pleading with her to never jinx their survival, he frantically begs her not to say something so terribly morbid. Norn silently gazes back at him, quietly absorbing the raw and genuine emotional distress radiating from his trembling form. A quiet, incredibly profound moment of mutual understanding heavily passes between the two unusual companions. Gripping his weapon tightly in his hand, Ray completely understands her selfless wish and fiercely promises to do his absolute best. Brimming with immense affectionate pride, Norn warmly praises him like an obedient and incredibly good boy. A massively wide and wonderfully joyful grin brilliantly breaks across her youthful face. Ray jokingly complains about being treated exactly like a helpless child again, prompting Norn to loudly laugh and playfully declare that to her, he truly is one. Effortlessly breaking the heavy emotional tension, Norn eagerly suggests they finally continue their dangerous journey deeper into the labyrinth. Ray firmly vows to absolutely return to this very dungeon after finishing his business outside, deeply hoping to proudly introduce his future friends and Nenemoa to herself. A visually resolute and intensely powerful final image completely solidifies his quiet, unbreakable determination to keep that very promise. The scene opens with a silent, evocative title scene. A quiet moment lingers in the atmosphere, signaling the end of an era. The serene silence continues as the weary traveler presses forward. A subtle pause marks the calm before the journey reaches its monumental conclusion. Spotting a familiar glow in the distance, Ray realizes he has finally found the exit. He visually confirms that the looming portal is their long-awaited destination. Gazing upon the threshold of the outside world, he acknowledges their safe arrival. Norn cheerfully agrees that their grueling journey together has finally ended. Reminding him to stay safe despite his immortal body, Norn warmly declares that her job as his mentor is done. Urging him to hurry up and leave, she notices him hesitating and asks what is wrong. Pausing right at the edge of freedom, Ray turns back and softly calls her name. He earnestly begs to know if there is any possible way she can come with him to the outside world. Staring at him with a solemn and understanding gaze, Norn quietly says his name. She gently explains that her real body died long ago, revealing that her current form is merely a magical construct created by the dungeon's aura. Elaborating on her tragic nature, she states that crossing the threshold would cause her magically constructed body to instantly disperse and disappear. Accepting her fate with a calm smile, she announces that this portal is where their paths must permanently diverge. Overcome with immense guilt, Ray sincerely apologizes for making her vocalize such a heartbreaking truth. Flustered by his sudden depression, Norn frantically tells him to cheer up before she feels like she is bullying him. Flashing a bright and reassuring smile, she tells him that everything is perfectly fine as long as he understands her unique situation. Struggling to find the right words, Ray hesitates slightly before preparing to make a heartfelt vow. Revealing her own hidden vulnerability, Norn asks him to visit occasionally so she will not succumb to loneliness. The emotional weight of her quiet request hangs heavily in the silent dungeon air. Steeling his resolve, Ray firmly nods and promises that he will definitely fulfill her request. Swearing to return, he reassures his beloved mentor that he will never let her feel abandoned because he genuinely likes this place. Teasingly suggesting he bring a girlfriend, Norn enthusiastically secures his promise to introduce her to any new friends he makes on the surface. She warmly encourages him to actually have some fun out there while actively pursuing his primary goal of reuniting with his friend. Bidding his final farewell, Ray turns toward the exit with renewed determination to face the future. With one last warning to be careful, Norn watches proudly as her powerful student steps into the blinding portal. A massive flash of light completely envelops Ray as he finally crosses the labyrinth's ancient boundary. Reflecting on his grueling timeline, he mentally notes that he survived on the labyrinth's absolute bottom floor for 3 entire years. Anxious thoughts race through his mind as he realizes it has been 5 total years since he last saw the outside world, wondering if anything has fundamentally changed. Despite his mounting anxiety over the unknown, a massive surge of pure thrill courses through his veins. Stepping out into the blinding daylight, he triumphantly declares that he has finally escaped to the surface. He looks up in absolute awe, drinking in the breathtaking and long-forgotten sight of a real blue sky. Chuckling softly to himself, he realizes his physical body is visibly trembling with excitement after spending so many years trapped in the dark. He pauses to take a deep, grounding breath of the crisp and refreshing surface air. Glancing back over his shoulder, he notices the magical labyrinth exit slowly fading into absolute nothingness. Whispering a final and heartfelt thank you to the wind, he honors the incredible mentor who completely saved his life. Analyzing the vanished portal, he correctly deduces that returning to Norn will require him to find and use the dungeon's original entrance. Slapping his cheeks to sharpen his focus, he enthusiastically hypes himself up for his brand new adventure. Planning his immediate next steps, he decides to find a nearby town to sell his dungeon loot and buy a clean pair of clothes. His keen, monster-honed senses suddenly pick up a strange and alarming scent drifting on the wind. Panicking briefly, he frantically sniffs himself to check if the foul odor is coming from his own ruined and unwashed gear. Narrowing his eyes in sudden realization, he quickly determines that the vile stench is definitely not originating from his own body. He immediately dashes forward through the dense forest brush to investigate the dangerous source of the foul odor. Recognizing the unmistakable and metallic scent of blood mixed with monsters, he instantly braces himself for imminent combat. Desperate and heavy panting echoes loudly through the woods as wounded human survivors frantically attempt to flee. The horrifying silhouettes of brutal, heavily armed monsters slowly emerge from the shadowy tree line to corner their prey. A sinister voice coldly reveals that their vicious ambush is an explicit order handed down directly from the monstrous higher-ups. Drooling, with unrestrained malice, the grotesque creature terrifyingly declares that it was ordered to feast on a massive amount of humans. Reflecting on a grim mandate, the narrator reveals that an executive of the Demon Lord ordered the demons to take down the capital and devour all weak humans. Driven by this ruthless command, the monstrous horde began preparing for a massive invasion of the capital. Executing their violent campaign, the demons relentlessly attacked travelers and merchants to plunder their valuable supplies. Raiding repeatedly, the horrific creatures slaughtered and devoured the humans they encountered without mercy. Despite their rampant destruction, the demons still lacked the necessary supplies to conquer the capital, realizing they needed to kill many more humans to assert their absolute superiority. The scene shifts to a tense ambush as demonic forces eagerly spot approaching humans and prepare for a violent slaughter. Brandishing his weapon, a massive demon gleefully declares his intent to brutally murder and plunder the incoming travelers. The monstrous creature revels in the sadistic thrill of hunting and eating his human victims. A carriage is violently attacked, sending debris flying wildly as the demon strikes with terrifying force. Panting heavily in a panic, a terrified human frantically curses his desperate situation amidst the chaotic wreckage. Recognizing his horrific attacker, the trembling man slowly realizes the true identity of the monster standing before him. Staring up at the towering beast in sheer dread, the man specifically notes the creature's defining single brown-colored horn. Wielding a giant war axe, the terrifying monster is finally identified as the notorious B-rank human hunter, Vegan. Chuckling darkly at the recognition, Vegan arrogantly remarks that his deadly reputation has made him quite famous. Surveying the ruined carriage, the demon notes that the stolen goods from the Drake Slave Company are exceptionally high in quality and magic power. A woman's piercing scream echoes through the wreckage as she cowers in absolute terror. Gazing down at the frightened captive, Vegan sadistically declares that the woman is also of remarkably high quality. Trembling violently on the ground, the desperate woman stammers in sheer terror as the massive demon looms over her vikes. Vegan remarks his surprise at finding only 3 people in the carriage, noting that the 2 escorts are actually holy knights instead of mere slaves. He casually admits that it is entirely natural for merchants to bring elite guards after his repeated, relentless attacks on the roads. The surviving holy knight gasps in horror as he fully grasps the overwhelming, deadly danger of his situation. Noticing the knight's sudden movement, Vegan mocks the terrified human for attempting a cowardly escape. Realizing he has absolutely zero chance of winning, the frantic knight notes that this legendary monster can easily cleave armor in half with a single swing use. Taunting the fleeing guard, Vegan sarcastically asks if he is truly a member of the official elite unit acknowledged by the king. Desperately justifying his retreat, the knight mentally insists he must survive to inform his higher-ups about this overwhelming threat. Charging furiously after his prey, the hulking demon mocks the knight for foolishly exposing his back in a fight. Blood drips heavily from Vegan's massive axe as he effortlessly strikes down the fleeing human. A massive pool of blood rapidly spreads beneath the holy knight's lifeless, butchered body. Disappointed by the lack of a challenge, Vegan sighs and insults the fallen knights for being entirely weak and merely for show. Turning his menacing gaze back to the surviving woman, the monstrous killer casually asks if she agrees with his grim assessment. The woman stares up in paralyzed horror at the blood-soaked monster towering dominantly above her. A choked gasp escapes her trembling lips as absolute. Suffocating despair completely consumes her bout. Dismissing the male corpses, Vegan declares that the demon beasts can feast on the foul-tasting men. Leaning in closer, he sadistically tells the terrified woman that she looks incredibly delicious to him. Ignoring her desperate pleas for help, the demon decides to take her as his personal pet before eventually devouring her, mockingly praising her pretty face. Thrilled by her sheer terror, Vegan eagerly remarks that her horrified expression is absolutely wonderful to behold. A deeply sinister grin spreads across his monstrous face as he anticipates the twisted, cruel fun to come. He cruelly promises that she will spend her final days living in a constant, agonizing state of fear. Detailing his sadistic plans, Vegan commands that she will cater to his every need while desperately begging him to spare her life, just like all his previous victims. Reflecting on the pathetic nature of his prey, the demon muses that humans are incredibly interesting creatures who will do absolutely anything when their lives are at stake. A sinister, muffled chuckle ominously echoes through the shadows as a dark thought fiercely takes form. A cruel narrator eagerly anticipates the twisted, broken expressions humans make when they are suddenly betrayed. An unseen victim shrieks in pure horror, their spirits shattering as they violently fall into complete despair. The sadistic voice absolutely revels in this emotional suffering, boldly declaring that they can never get enough of it. Desperate and broken, a crying victim weakly pleads for their miserable life to be spared. Laughing maniacally, the tormentor promises to torture them until their pitiful pleas for mercy turn into desperate begs for death. Abruptly shifting scenes, a polite greeting of a good afternoon completely catches someone off guard. A shocked individual freezes in stunned, wide-eyed silence at the sudden and completely unexpected appearance. The startled person stammers in deep confusion, entirely unable to process the newcomer's sudden arrival. A rugged, seemingly ordinary man calmly apologizes for the unexpected disturbance, casually explaining that he simply got lost. He nonchalantly points to the nearby woman, wondering aloud if she could possibly guide him to a neighboring village. A cold, imposing voice immediately rejects his simple request, bluntly stating that she absolutely cannot. Staring in disbelief, the man internally questions how this strange person approached so silently, though he notes he somewhat expected this outcome. He rapidly sharpens his focus, realizing the imposing newcomer is entirely drenched in monster blood despite his tattered clothing. Trembling violently in the background, the terrified woman frantically wonders who this horrifying, blood-soaked man could possibly be. She wildly begs the terrifying man to stay back while urgently screaming at the newcomer to run for his life. Ignoring her panicked warnings, the blood-soaked man coldly asks the newcomer if he actually plans to stand his ground. Tears streaming down her face, the woman desperately screams that the murderer is only after her and frantically begs the stranger to escape. Processing the chaotic situation with total indifference, the stranger calmly acknowledges her dire warning. He analytically notes the overwhelming scent of blood while firmly recognizing the murderer's incredibly aloof and dangerous demeanor. A sinister smirk swiftly crosses the murderer's face as he confidently declares he cannot leave any surviving witnesses. His deeply twisted mind suddenly concocts an incredibly sadistic and cruel idea. He wickedly plans to let the stranger run before striking him down from behind, intending to cleanly slice off both his legs while keeping him alive. With sickening excitement, he eagerly anticipates forcing the helpless woman to watch her would-be savior get brutally butchered right in front of her. A twisted giggle escapes his lips, as his dark imagination completely fuels his mounting, sadistic excitement. Staring down his unsuspecting prey, he coldly agrees to play a twisted little game. He smoothly lowers his guard and promises to let the stranger walk away completely unscathed. Tauntingly, he forces the newcomer to make a brutal choice between staying to save the captive woman or cowardly running for his own life. Ready to savor the psychological torment, he intensely demands to see the stranger's pained expression as he makes the agonizing decision. His sadistic grin instantly falters into pure confusion as the stranger reacts completely unexpectedly. Shrugging indifferently, the stranger casually accepts the offer and utterly abandons the woman without a single second thought. The murderer stands totally frozen in absolute disbelief. Struggling to process the stranger's cold-hearted and immediate betrayal, quickly recovering his composure, his twisted joy returns as he decides to simply relish the betrayed woman's agonizing despair instead. Suddenly, the panicked woman hysterically screams at the murderer to watch out behind him. A devastating strike lands before the villain can even register the warning, proving it is far too late to react. The fierce physical impact violently shatters the immediate area with blinding speed and explosive power. Dust and heavy debris aggressively explode outward as the brutal attack connects with absolute lethal precision. A massive, destructive shockwave forcefully rips through the battlefield, obliterating everything in its immediate path. The terrifying display of raw power violently concludes, leaving the surrounding environment totally devastated in its wake. Horrified by the sheer brutality of the overwhelming attack, the trembling woman weakly cries out in absolute terror at the cruel reality unfolding before her. Groaning in sudden pain, the battered creature struggles to comprehend what is happening. A chilling laugh escapes as the adrenaline of the brutal battle sets in. Reveling in the twisted display, the attacker gleefully declares that this terrified reaction is exactly what he wanted to see. The tense atmosphere thickens as the dust settles around the devastated combatants. Shifting his stance, the triumphant victor prepares for his next sadistic move. The victim watches in sheer horror as the undeniable gap in their strength becomes apparent. Taunting his prey, the attacker wonders aloud what kind of agonizing expressions the demon is making right now. A swift, imperceptible movement cuts through the heavy air. Feeling his vision spin out of control, the panic-stricken demon realizes his entire world is suddenly turning upside down. Sheer terror washes over him as he horrifyingly deduces that his head has just been severed from his body. The brutal reality of the decapitation hangs frozen in a terrifying moment of silence. A confused gasp escapes the demon's lips as his reality shatters. Smiling calmly, the young boy asks if the clean slice hurt, leaving the bewildered monster desperate to understand what just happened. The demon stares in absolute shock as the boy nonchalantly explains that he executed a perfectly clean cut. Staring in disbelief, the monster frantically demands to know why the boy's legs are still attached. The confused creature stammers that he was absolutely certain he had successfully sliced the boy's legs off earlier. Utterly losing his mind, the terrified demon screams to know what twisted sorcery the boy used on him. Unfazed, the boy bluntly explains that he simply cut off the demon's head with his knife and instantly reattached it using healing magic. Desperately rejecting this impossibility, the monster convinces himself that he is trapped in some kind of powerful illusion. The chaotic battlefield falls silent as the weight of the boy's impossible magic sinks in. The demon completely mentally breaks at the absurd notion of using a healing spell in such a brutal manner. Staring into the face of an incomprehensible power, the monster finally grasps one undeniable truth about his opponent. Every instinct screams at the panicked demon to run before this highly dangerous boy kills him. Cursing his overwhelming dread, the monster freezes as the boy casually tilts his head and asks what is wrong. Paralyzed by absolute terror, the frantic creature realizes his legs refuse to move despite his desperate need to flee. Stabbed. A dark flashback invades his mind, recalling the ruthless demonic creed that weak creatures are unnecessary and must violently consume humanity. The haunting memory of his brutal demonic superiors flashes through his terrified consciousness. Trapped between two horrors, he realizes that fleeing now would only result in execution by the four deadly demons. Snapping out of his paralyzing fear, the enraged monster roars that he must kill this arrogant boy. Desperately inflating his own ego, he proudly announces himself as the great human hunter vegan who refuses to be killed by a mere kid. Convincing himself of his own superiority, he furiously rallies his shattered confidence. Attempting to intimidate his foe, Vegan boasts that he has personally destroyed 3 entire human villages. Continuing his arrogant tirade, the monster brags about slaughtering several holy knights from the capital. Standing tall, he violently declares his supreme status as a higher demon. The boy watches the monster's desperate bravado with cold, completely unbothered eyes. Stepping forward with an overwhelming aura, the boy calmly asks if the demon finally understands the situation. Staring down the towering monster, the boy chillingly declares that Vegan is fundamentally weaker than him. The sheer, crushing pressure of the boy's presence completely shatters the demon's remaining willpower. The boy prepares a devastating final strike to end the pathetic confrontation once and for all. Sweating profusely in total defeat, the humiliated demon awkwardly admits his mistake and begs for forgiveness while insisting it will never happen again. The man realizes his tragic mistake, panting heavily as he admits he falsely believed he was the strong one hunting the weak. A terrifying, shadowed figure looms over him, coldly warning that if she ever sees his face again, there will be consequences. Threatening to kill him next time, she leaves him trembling with the horrifying realization that he is actually the weak prey being hunted. Turning her attention away from the fleeing attacker, she gently asks the rescued girl if she is okay. The nervous young girl, identifying herself as a slave named Liana, stammers out her profound gratitude for having her life saved. Startled by her slave status, the healer quickly shakes it off and tells Liana to forget about all of that. Looking down in utter disbelief, Liana stammers as she realizes her brutal injuries have been completely healed. The healer awkwardly confirms the severity of the wounds, noting that Liana's legs were entirely cut off. Thinking to himself, he finds it kind that Liana is worrying about him despite her own danger, reminding himself that he is a white mage. Shocked beyond belief, Liana frantically asks if he actually healed her severed legs in a single instant with his magic. Staring in awe, the young girl wonders aloud how she has never heard of such an incredibly powerful white mage before. Realizing his massive slip-up, the healer curses internally as he realizes he exposed his abnormal abilities. He reflects that his healing speed is not normal, but doing it daily for 5 years made it an unconscious reflex. Desperate to change the subject, he quickly addresses Liana and asks what she plans to do next. Caught off guard by the question, Liana looks down uncertainly and admits she has no idea. A solemn silence falls between the two as they consider the young girl's bleak and directionless future. Looking at Liana's vulnerable state, a deep sense of familiarity tugs at the healer's memories. He reflects that Liana deeply reminds him of his own past, when he was weak and utterly helpless. Nostalgia washes over him as he remembers those dark days when he was entirely dependent on someone else's support. Resolving that he cannot abandon a 12-year-old girl, he snaps out of his thoughts as Liana asks what is wrong. Thinking of a past companion named Nenemoa, he feels certain she would help this child if she were here. Putting on a gentle smile, he tells Liana that he is actually looking for a destination as well. Pausing thoughtfully, he reveals his intention to travel to the capital. Reaching out with a warm invitation, he gently asks if she would like to accompany him. He cheerfully suggests they go to the capital together, explaining that there are many opportunities there for her to find something good. Filled with a newfound desire to help others, just like Nenemoa did, he asks Liana what she thinks of his offer. Staring out with determination, he silently notes that it will take a while before he sees Nenemoa again. Meanwhile, in a dark and ominous laboratory, mysterious glowing pods fill a chilling room. A sudden, terrifying shriek pierces the silence as a horrific experiment goes terribly wrong. A dark figure watches indifferently as a monstrous amalgamation collapses, casually noting it as another failure. Frustrated by the unstable method, the dark figure shrugs it off, boasting that there are still plenty of materials left. Gazing sadistically at a captive girl suspended in a pod, the figure ominously declares that it is Nenemoa's turn next. Breaking the silence, Ray softly calls out Liana's name. He casually asks if she would like to accompany him on his journey to the royal capital. Looking down in hesitant compliance, Liana quietly agrees to his proposition. Wasting no time, Ray suggests they move as far as possible before nightfall. Changing into stolen garments, Liana silently rationalizes that she cannot enter the capital in tattered clothes, despite feeling guilty for taking them without permission. To compensate for the theft, Ray leaves behind a valuable dungeon mineral as payment, while hoping it covers the cost. Interrupting the quiet moment, Liana awkwardly addresses her savior with a highly respectful honorific. Caught off guard by the formal title, Ray stammers as she nervously brings up his earlier invitation. Bowing her head in shame, she apologizes and states that she cannot actually go with him. Genuinely confused by this sudden reversal, Ray asks her to explain the reason. The tense silence hangs in the air as Liana struggles to voice her deep-seated fears. Mustering her courage, she admits her terrifying worry that Vegan might return to attack them if they travel together. Ray briefly pauses as he recalls the monstrous demon from their earlier encounter. Brushing off her concern internally, he confidently muses that the traumatized demon won't attack anyone anytime soon since he thoroughly terrified the beast. Continuing his inner monologue, Ray casually notes that he could easily kill Vegan even if the monster dared to reappear. Catching his muttered words, Liana tilts her head in mild confusion. Quickly waving his hands, Ray nervously dismisses her question before noticing her lingering anxiety, assuring her that she no longer needs to worry about him. He warmly declares that she is free from slavery and can finally live a normal life. Clenching her clothes, Liana tragically explains that while her temporary master has died, her bondage remains. Pointing to her chest, she reveals that as long as the magical proof exists, she will forever remain a slave. Realization dawns on Ray as he remembers the inescapable nature of the slave's brand. He grimly recalls that the magic curse permanently attunes a slave to their master's energy, rendering them entirely unable to disobey orders. Kicking himself mentally, he admits that he completely failed to think the situation through. Realizing her grim reality, he notes that an unowned slave with an unknown origin cannot be sold, and no one will risk punishment to harbor her. His thoughts spiral into darkness as he acknowledges that an abandoned slave is doomed to prostitution, becoming monster fodder or suicide. Flashing back to their first meeting, he remembers how she desperately screamed for him to run away from Vegan to save his own life. The pieces finally fall into place as he realizes she rejected his invitation solely to protect him from the dangers surrounding her. He understands that her selfless heart is terrified of bringing harm to him. Drawing inspiration from his past, Ray imagines what his brave friend Nenemoa would do in this exact situation. Confident in her hypothetical strength, he knows Nenemoa would never back down if she had the power to protect someone. He feels absolutely certain that his dear friend would reach out her hand to save a life. Resolving his internal conflict, Ray finally figures out the absolute best way to help Liana. Stepping forward with newfound purpose, he gently calls out to the bewildered girl. Looking her straight in the eyes, he asks if she would be willing to forge a new contract with him. Liana stares back in utter, breathless shock at the impossible proposal. Stammering in a panic, she warns him that skipping the formal ownership transfer procedures could lead to severe legal punishment if anyone finds out. Smiling reassuringly, Ray calmly states that he is well aware of the risks. Reaching toward his own collar, he begins to pull his shirt down to reveal his own hidden secret. Liana gasps in pure disbelief as her eyes lock onto his exposed skin. Trembling wildly, she stares in absolute shock at the undeniable magic slave proof branded onto his own body. Staring at the mark, the protagonist reveals they used medicine to hide the agonizing proof of their status. Confirming her suspicion that he is a slave, he notes the constant need to meticulously reapply the cover-up, reassuring him gently. She explains that he has absolutely nothing to worry about since she was abandoned herself. Struggling with his lingering shame, he hesitates to fully accept her warm comfort. A sudden and alarming noise violently interrupts their quiet conversation. Their heads immediately snap toward the horrifying source of the approaching disturbance. Staring into the darkness, he instantly recognizes the terrifying outline of an approaching monster. A low, menacing growl aggressively echoes through the silent chamber. Realizing the grim situation, he deduces these are the dangerous remnants of the horde Vegan brought. To his absolute horror, a massive swarm of bloodthirsty creatures emerges from the shadows. Shielding his companion, he urgently commands Liana to stay back while he handles the lethal threat. A massive beast violently lunges forward with a deafening roar. The terrifying creature furiously closes the distance to strike them down. Reacting on sheer instinct, he aggressively channels dense magic power directly into his leg. Timing his counterattack perfectly, he prepares to explosively release all the gathered energy at once. He delivers a devastatingly powerful kick that violently crushes the charging beast. Standing his ground firmly, he fiercely vows that he will never let the monsters pass. The brutal impact of his strike violently knocks the surrounding creatures off balance. Watching in awe, Liana quickly realizes he possesses absurd combat skills far beyond those of a normal healer. The immediate battlefield settles as he flawlessly maintains his defensive stance. A tense silence heavily descends over the tense combatants. Unfazed by their fallen comrade, the remaining monsters fiercely prepare their next vicious assault. The suffocating tension thickens as the deadly swarm tightly surrounds the duo. Assessing the grim odds, he quickly realizes the sheer number of remaining enemies is overwhelming. Remembering his previous victory, he decides to aggressively replicate the brutal tactics he used against Vegan. Just as he plans to violently imprint utter fear into the horde, a sudden shock catches him completely off guard. Stepping forward bravely, Liana forcefully swings a wooden weapon and violently strikes an approaching monster. The surprising blow solidly connects, temporarily staggering the aggressive creature. Gripping her weapon tightly, Liana firmly stands her ground against the terrifying odds. Panting nervously, she celebrates her successful hit while trying to process the intense adrenaline. Bursting with sudden determination, Liana boldly declares that she will stand and fight right alongside him. Utterly bewildered by her reckless courage, he frantically questions what she is doing. Smiling nervously, she quickly attempts to reassure him not to worry about her safety. She proudly reveals her extensive weapons training, although she admits this is her first real battlefield experience. Shocked by this revelation, he loudly questions how a mere slave could possibly possess actual combat training. He quickly realizes that modern slaves are now brutally conditioned for violent combat rather than just manual labor. Processing the dark truth, he grimly acknowledges just how drastically the world has changed over the past 5 years. Snapping back to reality, a sharp grunt reminds them that the deadly battle is far from over. A chorus of vicious, bloodthirsty growls violently erupts from the advancing monster horde. Bracing themselves for the inevitable clash, the duo prepares to fight for their lives against the encroaching darkness. The scene opens silently as the tense battle reaches a critical turning point. Observing the grim situation, Ray realizes that fighting against this massive number of enemies is simply too much for the girl to handle alone. Suddenly, an unexpected shift in the atmosphere catches everyone completely off guard. The battlefield falls quiet as a terrifying, unseen pressure begins to rapidly materialize. Unleashing his overwhelming power, Ray notes that his enemies should easily be able to feel his crushing aura. The sheer weight of his magical presence paralyzes the opposition in their tracks. Glaring down at the terrified foes, he coldly challenges them, asking if they still plan to continue their foolish attack. overwhelmed by his immense strength. The enemies immediately lose all their remaining will to fight. Releasing a sigh of relief, Rei confidently declares that everything should finally be okay now. The exhausted girl collapses to her knees, panting heavily as the immediate danger completely fades away. She looks up in sheer confusion, struggling to process the sudden and miraculous rescue. Frantically apologizing, she insists that she is perfectly fine despite her visibly battered condition. Brushing off his concern about her injuries, she deeply thanks him for saving her life once again. A moment of heavy silence passes as Rei silently studies her desperate and self-sacrificing demeanor. Confirming his initial suspicions, he realizes exactly what kind of mindset this girl operates under. He recognizes that she genuinely believes she is just a burden and was fully prepared to fight to the death without caring about her own life. Knowing he must give her a proper reason to stay by his side, he abruptly brings up the contract they discussed earlier. Formulating a clever excuse, he boldly lies and claims that he has lost his memories of the past several years. Utterly shocked by this sudden revelation, the girl gasps in pure disbelief. Internally justifying his deception, Rei notes that explaining his long imprisonment in a dungeon would just confuse her and be entirely too troublesome. Playing the role of an amnesiac, he humbly asks her to teach him about recent events, since she is far more knowledgeable than he is. Inwardly, he calculates that he desperately needs her worldly knowledge to gather information and track down his friend Nine. Offering a mutually beneficial deal, he promises to pay and protect her from all harm if she agrees to share her knowledge, leaving her stunned by his extreme generosity. Cutting through her hesitation, he bluntly states that the simple truth is that he genuinely needs her. Flustered and overwhelmed, she quietly repeats his words, barely able to comprehend that someone actually needs her. Staring her directly in the eyes, Rei firmly confirms his statement without a single ounce of hesitation. The heavy emotional weight of his absolute sincerity washes over the battered girl. Gathering her scattered thoughts, she quietly processes the incredible lifeline he has just thrown her. Readily accepting his generous terms, she admits she would have definitely died without his timely intervention anyway. Excitedly finalizing their agreement, they exchange mutual thanks as Rei joyfully declares that their new partnership is officially decided. A glowing magical connection begins to form, sealing the profound pact between the two survivors. Pledging her absolute loyalty, she excitedly begs Rei to order her around, confirming that the magical contract is finally complete. Mentally reviewing his strategy, Rei clarifies to himself that he formed the contract to utilize its two massive tactical advantages, rather than out of a desire to be her master. He breaks down the benefits, noting that they can now constantly track each other's exact locations, while he can also share his magic power to enhance her bodily survivability. Summarizing his ultimate goal, he determines that this powerful magical link simply makes it far easier for him to protect her in combat. Formally introducing herself again, she politely asks him to call her Liana, moving forward. Repeating her humble request, she solidifies her new identity and role by his side. Enthusiastically looking forward to their partnership, Rei asks her to just call him by his first name. Catching her off guard, he awkwardly clarifies that she really does not need to add highly respectful honorifics when addressing him. The scene gracefully fades out on their newfound alliance as they prepare to face the dangerous world together. Rei halts their journey, casually suggesting they set up camp for the day. Sensing her hesitation, he gently warns Liana not to overexert herself or hurt her tired feet, though she stubbornly insists she can still walk. Trailing off nervously, the young girl looks down with a deeply conflicted expression, trembling with guilt. She apologizes for forcing them to stop while admitting she is utterly terrified of nocturnal monsters. Smiling warmly to ease her fears, Rei reassures her and suggests they rest in the stolen carriage tent, since he is quite tired himself. Greatly relieved by his kindness, Liana softly agrees to the comforting plan. A wide, atmospheric shot reveals their peaceful campsite nestled safely within the quiet wilderness coved. Rei inwardly marvels at Liana's impressive upbringing, genuinely surprised that a slave was educated in combat, chores, and store management. Shifting the conversation, Rei notes that there is one more truly shocking thing they need to discuss. Earning her absolute attention, he clarifies that this surprising realization is regarding their current geographic location. Her eyes widen in sheer panic as she repeats the name of the Serval territory in utter disbelief. Confirming her worst fears, Rei notes they are currently in the central area, exactly 2 days south of the royal capital. Pausing thoughtfully, Rei mutters the territory's name to himself, while Liana nervously calls out to him. Connecting the geographic dots, he reflects that his former party originally entered the dungeon from the northern Lugardan territory, meaning he emerged on the exact opposite side of the capital. Astonished by the sheer scale of his journey, he realizes Yggdrasil's labyrinth is far more massive than anyone ever imagined. Breaking his silent epiphany, Liana shyly admits she was also deeply surprised by his overwhelming combat strength. She recounts a vivid memory from her training, explaining she was once allowed to observe a high-ranking Holy Knights match in the royal capital. Remembering her harsh past, she notes her masters ordered her to learn battle tactics by strictly watching the elite warriors. Comparing those legendary knights to her new savior, she boldly declares that they were far weaker and completely different in their movements. Flustered by the immense compliment, Rei stammers in genuine shock. Pressing her point, Liana earnestly shares her belief that even the highest-ranking knights could not possibly keep up with his speed. She confidently stands by this assessment, stating it is what she truly felt after watching him effortlessly obliterate threats along the way. Gazing up at him with pure awe, she softly murmurs that he is a truly amazing person. Blushing slightly, Rei bashfully thanks her for the ticklish praise and admits he is glad to hear it as her bodyguard. Instantly panicking over her own boldness, Liana profusely apologizes, claiming such lofty praise from a lowly slave is far above her station. Before Rei can calm her down, a terrifying, massive tremor violently shakes the very earth beneath their feet. The heavy shockwave aggressively ripples through the dark forest, shattering the peaceful atmosphere. Startled by the overwhelming force, Rei frantically looks around to identify the sudden threat. Trembling in absolute terror, Liana squeaks and asks if another deadly monster is approaching. Springing into action, Rei orders Liana to stay exactly where she is. Narrowing his eyes into the darkness, he gravely deduces that the approaching entity is of a much stronger tier than the beast he drove off earlier. As ominous rustling echoes from the dark brush, Liana gasps while Rei firmly commands her to wait. A suffocating, tense silence engulfs the shadowed campsite as Rei prepares for imminent combat. Meanwhile, far away from the forest, a completely different group of imposing adventurers finally reaches their dark destination. Standing arrogantly before a towering gate, Loki asks his team if they are ready to conquer the A-rank dungeon known as the Dream Door of Death. His diverse party members confidently voice their eager agreement. Brimming with deadly anticipation, smirking with absolute confidence, Loki declares they have nothing to fear now that they are an S-rank party bolstered by their new white magician, Kanata. Staring down into the dark abyss of the dungeon entrance, the treacherous leader prepares his elite squad. With a dominant wave of his hand, Loki aggressively commands his party to begin the grand conquest. Flashing back several months ago, the scene shifts to a grand, imposing location. The bustling royal capital stands proudly beneath the bright sky. High walls and majestic spires mark the formidable exterior of Valand Castle. Walking through the grand halls, Loki reflects that it has been over 5 years since he last visited this place. He strides confidently down the ornate corridor while taking in the nostalgic surroundings. He remembers that his last visit occurred right before his party, Gonkino Dongwa, achieved greatness. Specifically, it was the momentous occasion when his elite group was officially promoted to A rank. Marching forward with echoing footsteps, he notes that only a select few individuals are ever permitted to enter the castle walls. Commoners and non-royalty are strictly forbidden from entering unless they are receiving a prestigious award. Pausing in the majestic space, Loki feels a deep sense of nostalgia washing over him as the castle brings back old memories. He solemnly recalls the kingdom's core belief that humanity itself represents the divine. This supreme ideology dictates that humans cannot allow demons to defile the sacred land where they live. Driven by divine righteousness, the kingdom firmly believes they are inherently just in their ultimate mission to annihilate the demon lord. Empowered by these exact words, the king officially deployed the hero to eliminate the ultimate demonic threat. The memory shifts to a grand ceremony where an official loudly calls Loki Vidrador forward to receive his honors. The announcer formally declares the name of his esteemed adventuring party, Gonkino Dongwa. Presenting an official certificate, the official declares that their extensive dungeon conquests have officially elevated them to an S-rank party. Despite the grand achievement, Loki silently notes that his party was merely one of 4 groups receiving promotions that day. Surrounding adventurers whisper among themselves while casting envious and awed glances toward the newly promoted heroes. Staring proudly ahead, Loki revels in the fact that Gonkino Dongwa was the only group to achieve the legendary S-rank. A dark, satisfied smirk twitches on his face as he silently enjoys the burning jealousy of his peers. Bowing respectfully, Loki loudly pledges that his party will continue striving to become the kingdom's foundation against the demon lord. The presiding official nods in stern approval and expresses high expectations for their future conquests. Acknowledging the heavy responsibility, Loki firmly accepts the official's expectations with absolute confidence. Exhaling a deep breath of relief, the young leader mentally celebrates the conclusion of the exhausting formal ceremony. Walking away from the podium, he silently rejoices that he has finally attained the highest possible adventurer rank. He reflects on the grueling journey, recalling the massive number of dungeons conquered and missions completed to rise from C rank all the way to S rank. Thrilled by his new status, he anticipates dramatic reward increases and kingdom support that will permanently end his financial worries. Suddenly, a cheerful acquaintance spots him in the crowd and enthusiastically calls out his name. The man loudly praises Loki for reaching S-Rank at merely 20 years old, declaring him a truly extraordinary talent. Feigning humility, Loki politely thanks the man for his overwhelming compliments and praise. The man continues to fawn over him, noting that most other parties still miserably fail at conquering A-rank dungeons. Masking his immense ego behind a calm smile, Loki bathes in the glorious adulation of his peers. Internally screaming with absolute delight, he embraces the intoxicating rush of being universally recognized, that he passionately muses that this endless respect and praise is the true, exhilarating purpose of becoming an adventurer. Closing his eyes in pure ecstasy, Loki feels his massive, deeply rooted thirst for approval finally being quenched. Outwardly playing the humble leader, he publicly credits his party members' exceptional talents for their grand success. While verbally praising his comrades, his inner thoughts venomously insult them as useless trash, completely dependent on his superior leadership. Arrogantly dismissing their contributions in his mind, he firmly believes his party members owe him endless gratitude for their success. The acquaintance excitedly predicts that Loki's powerful party will soon accompany the legendary hero to conquer ultimate dungeons and slay the Demon Lord's generals. An old man boldly suggests that the young adventurer's party might actually be capable of defeating the fabled undead terror on their own. Chuckling nervously, the young man modestly promises to do his absolute best against such a formidable threat. Quickly excusing himself, he politely explains that his party members are eagerly waiting for him at the gate. Turning his back on the conversation, he begins walking silently toward his awaiting team. Dropping his polite facade, he internally grumbles about the annoying old man's completely unrealistic dreams of them defeating the undead terror. He mentally reviews the horrifying stats of the A+ rated undead terror, noting its toxic exterior and absolute immortality as long as its core remains intact, highlighting its unimaginable speed and irregular attacks. He grimly admits his entire party would be mercilessly slaughtered in mere seconds by even the weakest human-type variant. He ultimately concludes that even the fabled hero couldn't possibly defeat such a disaster-class monster completely alone. The fully assembled party firmly strides together across the rugged landscape. Standing before a massive, ominous gate, the team silently braces themselves for the dangers lurking within. Pushing through the towering entrance, they confidently step into the suffocating darkness of the labyrinth. The heavily armed group cautiously navigates the dim, winding corridors of the subterranean depths. Pushing the grim thoughts aside, he confidently rationalizes that the undead terror is strictly confined to SSS-Rank dungeons like Yggdrasil. He reassuringly guarantees himself that they will never encounter such a nightmarish beast in a million years. The ominous title of the A-Rank dungeon, the Dream Door of Death, aggressively dominates the cavernous interior. In the heat of sudden combat, a teammate desperately screams for Himino to execute their coordinated strategy. Springing into action, Suglinst viciously confirms he is moving exactly according to the established plan. A teammate loudly praises Himino for setting up the perfect, highly accurate opening strike. Seizing the momentary advantage, Suglinst aggressively launches a devastating physical attack. Landing heavily, the brutish warrior triumphantly celebrates what he assumes is a flawless victory. Watching the reckless display, a frustrated teammate curses the warrior's complete idiocy. Caught completely off guard, Suglinst sharply gasps in shock as the situation instantly deteriorates. The seemingly defeated monster violently retaliates, completely disrupting the warrior's premature celebration. A chaotic blur of rapid movement narrowly avoids a deeply lethal counterattack. Maintaining his composure, the tactical leader calmly praises Feel for swiftly intervening. Stepping forward, the magic user confidently vows to completely obliterate the beast, using a potent magical barrier. Turning his absolute fury toward the careless warrior, the leader violently screams at Suglinst to pay attention. He furiously reminds the brute that he must explicitly crush the monster's head instead of just randomly slashing at it. Picking his ear with total indifference, Suglinst lazily complains about the leader's incredibly noisy nagging. The arrogant warrior dismissively argues that the monster is dead anyway, leaving the leader simmering with silent rage. Realizing planning is entirely useless with such an idiot, the frustrated leader sharply demands an update from their struggling healer, Kanata. Sweating profusely, Kanata nervously apologizes and desperately begs for just a little more time, letting out an exhausted sigh. The deeply weary leader simply tells him to completely forget about it. He coldly dictates that the party will abruptly halt their progress and strictly resume only when the arm is fully healed. Kanata silently hangs his head in deep shame as he continues carefully channeling his restorative magic. The leader bitterly internalizes his mounting frustration. Recognizing they still have a massively long and grueling road ahead of them, the narrative dramatically refocuses on the sinister reputation of the Dream Door of Death. A dark history reveals that 50 ambitious miners dug out this exact entrance 3 years ago in a desperate search for rare ores. The grim reality heavily sets in, as the story confirms, not a single one of those miners ever returned alive. Undeterred by the bloody history, the elite party of Gunkino Donghua presses forward to investigate the massacre and completely conquer the labyrinth. Scanning the quiet surroundings, a party member notices something amiss and pauses. Turning back, he asks the dark mage Feel what she is doing lingering behind. Staring intently at the ground, Feel softly murmurs the name of the delicate snowdrop flowers. A teammate steps closer, asking if she is referring to the white blossoms scattered across the dungeon floor. Feel explains that these flowers normally only grow in snowfields, but their second characteristic allows them to bloom in areas saturated with strong magic power. Deducing the dark truth, she warns the group that the presence of these flowers means a terrifyingly strong monster is lurking nearby. Stepping forward with a tense expression, Himeno confirms that her Sword Saint's blessing is reacting violently to the unseen threat. Panic begins to set in, as another member questions if this is truly an A-rank dungeon, if a monster far above their level is present. The narrative notes that Himeno's skill not only boosts her physical reflexes, but also acts as an early warning system against superior enemies. Trembling at the implication, a frightened party member asks what they should do now that they are facing such a dangerous anomaly. Cutting through the fear with absolute authority, the leader aggressively commands the party to continue forward. Smirking skeptically, a teammate asks the esteemed leader if he is truly sure about this reckless decision. Clicking his tongue in annoyance, the leader glares at the irritating tone of his subordinate churs, justifying his bold choice. The leader arrogantly boasts that they will be fine, since they have already conquered many dungeons and defeated countless A-rank monsters. He gestures toward Kanata, bragging that they have a talented white mage this time, though she hesitates at the sudden praise. Blushing modestly, Kanata admits she is only ranked 20th and is nowhere near as skilled as the first rank, Ray Adin. The entire party freezes in their tracks, utterly bewildered by the name. Stuttering in absolute shock, a teammate demands to know exactly what she just said. They repeat the name in a collective gasp of disbelief. Kanata calmly confirms she means Ray Din Huel, prompting the party to frantically ask if she is talking about their former useless member who was lost in Yggdrasil. Internally reeling, the party refuses to accept that their discarded trash could possibly be the highest-ranked healer in existence. Gripping her staff with fierce devotion, Kanata passionately declares her deep admiration for Ray's incredible fighting style. She praises his genius ability to instantly read the battlefield, analyze enemy data, and perfectly command his party without heavily relying on healing magic. Scoffing at the praise, a party member mentally notes the pathetic real reason Ray rarely casts spells. Bursting into cruel laughter, Suglinst yells that Ray rarely casts spells because he was a piece of trash incapable of doing so. He ruthlessly mocks the boy's pitifully low magic power, claiming Ray could not even heal properly if his life depended on it. Smirking silently, Loki feels grateful that the loudmouth idiot is conveniently expressing his exact thoughts. Unfazed by their vicious mockery, Kanata simply stares back in calm silence. Nodding quietly, she calmly agrees with their harsh assessment of his magical reserves. She proudly explains that Ray relentlessly studied books to invent a unique tactical style that protected his party without draining his limited magic. Continuing her fervent worship, she firmly declares him to be the one and only greatest white mage. Grinding their teeth in intense frustration, the party glares at her unwavering devotion. They angrily wonder why this woman continues to heap such ridiculous praise on someone so pathetic. Ignoring their rising ire, Kanata adds that absolutely no one can compete with Ray when it comes to raw healing speed. Her voice dropping to a serious tone, she prepares to reveal the true terrifying extent of his magical abilities. Shocking the arrogant group, she reveals that Ray's power transcended normal healing, allowing him to instantly reattach severed limbs and destroyed tissues. She notes that ordinary white mages can only slightly increase a target's natural healing rate at best. A dark and terrifying realization begins to dawn on the party as they comprehend her words. Panic sets in as they realize their past survival against fatal injuries, and promotion to S-rank might have been entirely due to Ray's unseen, miraculous intervention. The crushing truth finally shatters their massive egos as they realize they never would have even reached A-rank without Ray's silent protection. The shocked adventurers ponder their narrow escape, realizing they easily could have ended up completely dead. Loki glares forward with a chilling intensity, finally putting together the terrifying truth in his mind. The party members fall into a stunned silence as they recall their long-held suspicions that Ray was never an ordinary healer. They remember fallen white mages explaining that healing magic requires immense concentration, making it impossible to heal while serving as bait. Recalling standard healing rates, taking hours just for a broken bone, they realize instant healing in under a second is truly unheard of. They reflect on the reality of healing magic, knowing that without a deep anatomical understanding, a mage will only make injuries worse. Coming to a startling epiphany, they realize those other white mages were actually competent, and that reattaching a severed arm should have been impossible. Fury and regret consume Himeno, as she angrily curses Ray for keeping his miraculous healing capabilities a complete secret. Cutting their realization short, Himeno suddenly senses a terrifying presence and screams for everyone to hide immediately. Tense and sweating, the party looks to Himeno as they confirm a monster of horrific power is rapidly closing in. Himeno confirms their dread with a grim nod, locking her focus onto the approaching entity. With trembling certainty, she identifies the incoming threat as the sole dungeon master. The party panics in sheer disbelief, frantically questioning why the lowest floor boss has appeared so early. Feeling an overwhelming aura, Himeno senses an S-rank entity while her very blessing screams at her to run for her life. The terrifying reality of facing an S-rank monster hits them with full force, rendering them momentarily paralyzed. Remembering the horrors of the Yggdrasil labyrinth, they desperately scramble to decide their next move. Loki forces himself to stay calm, reminding his comrades that 5 years have passed and they earned their S-rank promotion through sheer power. Bursting with desperate bravado, Loki commands the party to fight and prove they are no longer the weaklings they once were. Reinvigorated by their leader's fierce declaration, the team prepares their weapons and steels their resolve for battle. Drawing their blades in unison, the party charges boldly into the darkness to meet the beast head-on. A blinding light suddenly tears through the shadows, signaling the arrival of an overwhelming entity. The adventurers freeze in pure horror as the true silhouette of the nightmare emerges before them. An undead terror cheerfully greets the adventurers, driving the team into absolute despair over its insurmountable strength. Panic surges through the ranks as they recall that even the legendary hero required an entire party to defeat such a beast. Mockingly asking if they hate talking, the grotesque humanoid creature looms closer to the petrified squad. Loki frantically searches for hope, noting that the humanoid shape of the monster might give them a fighting chance. Determined to survive, Loki rallies his resolve and convinces himself they just have to fight on par with the hero's party. A sinister, overwhelming pressure radiates from the beast, suffocating the atmosphere of the cavern. The beast moves with unsettling fluidity, revealing its warped and unstable physical nature. Recognizing the creature's foul stench and dark aura, the leader confirms his grim deduction about its identity. Their chances plummet even further as they realize this creature is the most troublesome liquid-type variation. The grotesque liquid-type undead terror laughs gleefully, ready to mercilessly slaughter the party in its deadly game. Reflecting on the past, a lone adventurer recalls standing in this exact spot around 2 years ago. Looming dominantly before her was the terrifying entrance to the hardest SSS-Rank dungeon, Yggdrasil's Labyrinth. The silent memory hangs heavily in the air as the immense scale of the deadly dungeon dominates the landscape. Her grim reflections are suddenly interrupted as a gentle voice from the past softly calls out Ray's name. Startled by the sudden attention, Ray turns quickly and addresses his party member, Phil. Blushing nervously, he timidly offers her a butterfly hair clip while insisting it would look beautiful on her. Surprised by the gesture, Phil listens quietly as Ray explains he wanted to give her a birthday present to show his deep gratitude. Brushing off her belief that she did nothing to deserve it, Ray passionately lists how she always saves him in battle and helps with his daily chores. Touched by his heartfelt sincerity, Phil happily accepts the clip and promises to treasure it forever. Snapping back to the bleak present, Phil silently curses her own weakness and realizes how foolishly wrong she had been. She frustratedly remembers constantly telling Loki that Ray was the true driving force, perfectly supporting their party. Dismissing her completely, Loki coldly argued that Ray was merely a perfect support tool, only useful for gathering information and acting as monster bait. Condescendingly addressing Phil, the arrogant leader sneered that it was entirely natural for someone as pathetic as Ray to work the hardest. Loki cruelly justified his abuse by declaring Ray the absolute weakest white mage who hopelessly lacked combat power, and couldn't even cast a single healing spell. He ruthlessly insisted that Ray had to constantly overwork himself just to compensate for his absolute uselessness in order to remain affiliated with Gonki no Dongwa. Defeated by Loki's impenetrable arrogance, Phil realized her words held absolutely no power and arguing with the party was completely pointless. Abandoning her protests, she stopped talking entirely until a sudden voice aggressively recognizes her in the present. A mysterious young girl approaches confidently, casually mentioning that she spotted Phil lurking around the area the other day. The stranger curiously points out Phil's frequent visits and bluntly asks if she is preparing to conquer the deadly dungeon. Guarded and heavily confused, Phil glares at the girl and coldly demands to know her true identity. Striking a dramatic pose, the mysterious stranger cheerfully introduces herself as a pretty girl who treats this terrifying dungeon as her personal garden. Unamused by the childish introduction, Phil aggressively presses the girl to reveal her actual name. Suddenly paralyzed by an unseen magical force, Phil panics while the stranger playfully scolds her for being excessively rude. The girl sternly warns Phil not to enter the labyrinth, declaring she would die instantly with her current, pathetic level of ability. Trapped in place, Phil grits her teeth and strains desperately against the overwhelming magical binding gripping her body. Impressed that File successfully shattered the binding spell, the mysterious girl notes that her magic power actually feels quite familiar. Connecting the dots, the girl correctly guesses that Feel visited this exact dungeon a few years prior. Questioning her suicidal motives, the girl asks why Feel would desperately return when she already knows how insanely dangerous Yggdrasil truly is. The fourth quarter intensity, driven by sheer desperation, File passionately screams that she needs to enter the labyrinth strictly to find Ray Hez. Hearing the name, the mysterious girl pauses and casually asks if Ray happens to be a white-haired white mage. File freezes completely in absolute shock, stunned that this bizarre stranger accurately knows his exact description. Hesitantly confirming the description, the girl curiously asks if Fale is his good friend. Looking down in profound shame, Fale sadly admits that Ray probably doesn't consider her a friend anymore after she abandoned him. Tilting her head in deep confusion, the girl completely fails to understand Fale's suffocating guilt. The girl confidently declares Fale a true friend, noting she has been preparing to enter the deadly dungeon with the absolute determination to die just to find him. Overflowing with bitter regret, Fale cries that sacrificing her own life won't bring Ray back, but she desperately needs to try anyway. Frantically waving her hands, the mysterious girl interrupts the tragic monologue and aggressively scolds Fale for blindly assuming Ray is dead. The stranger bluntly reveals that Ray is perfectly alive, sending Fale into a state of sheer, breathless disbelief. Smiling brightly, the girl cheerfully assures Fale that Ray is entirely healthy and has simply decided to live comfortably inside the dungeon. Informing the stunned mage that S-rank monsters frequently patrol the area, the girl dismisses File by stating she no longer needs to visit this dangerous place. Norn realizes with profound relief that Ray is still alive. Tears of joy stream down her face as she sobs in pure thankfulness for his survival. A spectral figure gently observes her tears, noting that Ray still has a warm place to return to and a friend who deeply cares. The ghost clarifies her request, confirming she wants him to leave a specific stash of items near the waterfall on floor 125 for Ray to find. He calmly agrees to fulfill the unusual errand without further complaint. Probing her intentions, the ghost asks if she is absolutely sure she doesn't want to leave a personal message, which she firmly declines. Shrugging off his confusion, the ghost agrees to deliver the rucksack containing Ray's belongings, despite doubting Ray will actually use them. She warmly thanks the spectral figure for his invaluable assistance with a bright smile. As payment, she generously hands over a highly valuable and incredibly rare soulstone found deep within the labyrinth. Stunned by the hefty reward, the ghost double-checks if he can truly accept it, which she cheerfully confirms in exchange for his help. She urgently begs the spirit to look after Ray and explicitly states her conditions if he ever decides to return to the surface. With a final request, she tells the cute ghost to ensure Ray never returns to the dungeon, marking a turning point on this fateful day. The narrative shifts as a burdened soul confesses that simply knowing Ray is alive feels like ultimate salvation. Despite this crushing relief, they solemnly acknowledge their unforgivable actions and accept their eternal sin. Maniacal laughter suddenly erupts, violently shattering the somber reflection of the guilty party. Plunging back into brutal combat, the tactical leader urgently shouts at File to check her remaining magical reserves. Gripping her staff, File firmly confirms she still has enough magical power to cast her spells. She frantically explains that the undead terror's blinding speed prevents her from finding any opening to attack. The overwhelming assault completely denies her the crucial moment needed to unleash her heavy magic. A sudden, agonizing grunt escapes as a brutal attack unexpectedly lands on the vulnerable mage. The leader violently curses, in sheer panic, as Feel is viciously struck down by the relentless beast. Absolute shock forcefully paralyzes the remaining party members as they watch their teammate fall. A devastating spray of blood explodes through the air as magical defenses are brutally shattered. Feel violently collapses to the unforgiving ground, completely overwhelmed by the monstrous force. The terrifying monster relentlessly continues its deadly assault without a single second of hesitation. The creature emits a chilling, eerie sound as it cruelly towers over its fallen prey. A horrific shadow violently engulfs the downed mage as the beast prepares a fatal strike. A sinister thought coldly observes just how incredibly fragile human adventurers truly are when faced with absolute power. Another party member freezes in absolute, wide-eyed terror at the grisly scene unfolding before them. The murderous entity smoothly shifts its deadly focus, marking the next victim with a chilling promise of death. Desperate to turn the tide, Himeno aggressively lunges forward with a fiercely determined battle cry. She expertly channels her elemental power into a blistering, high-speed sword strike aimed at the monster. Moving with impossible agility, the undead terror effortlessly evades the desperate ambush. The monstrous creature instantly retaliates by launching a blindingly fast counterattack against the swordswoman. A devastating blow viciously tears through Himeno's defenses, drawing a massive spray of blood across the battlefield. Utter confusion rapidly washes over her face as she struggles to comprehend the fatal strike that pierced her. Ear-piercing screams of pure agony erupt as Himeno is violently butchered, prompting her horrified teammates to scream her name. Staring at the absolute massacre, a paralyzed teammate weakly questions the waking nightmare unfolding before them. Crumpling into sheer despair, the shattered leader groans that this brutal slaughter was never part of the plan. A desperate, blood-curdling warning violently snaps him back to reality as the monstrous threat looms directly in front of him. A haunting silence blankets the battlefield as the immediate aftermath of a brutal encounter sets in. The heavy quiet stretches on, amplifying the unseen dread lurking in the shadows. Tension continues to build rapidly in the completely wordless and oppressive environment. The eerie stillness reaches a breaking point, just before pure chaos finally erupts. Agonized screams suddenly pierce the air, as battered adventurers frantically cry out for their leader in sheer agony. Amidst the bloody carnage, a desperate party member angrily screams at Kanata and demands to know what she is doing. Another injured teammate curses her as a slowpoke, viciously ordering the frantic healer to hurry up and cast her magic. The intense panic skyrockets as the terrifying reality of their imminent slaughter truly sets in. Stumbling backward in sheer terror, someone desperately begs their monstrous attacker to wait and communicate, groveling pathetically on the ground. A completely broken adventurer tearfully apologizes and begs to be spared. Abandoning all loyalty, the coward loudly offers up his teammates to the monster, screaming that he absolutely cannot die yet. Trembling in absolute shock, the pathetic survivor stammers out Loki's name as the true horror of the situation dawns on him. The dark, towering entity merely lets out a heavy and entirely unimpressed sigh. Staring down with unmasked disgust, the monster coldly remarks that the adventurer's desperate screaming is incredibly dirty. The terrifying figure aggressively states that it simply cannot stand such a pathetic display. A suffocating aura of death completely envelops the shattered and paralyzed party. Tilting its head, the monster mockingly clarifies that hearing such cowardly screams is utterly repulsive. Suddenly, a massive explosion of roaring fire erupts across the battlefield as a powerful Giga Flame spell is cast. Caught completely off guard by the blinding blast, a dazed adventurer gasps in confusion while calling out to fail. Panting heavily, Kanata urgently tells Feel that she will lure the undead terror away so the others can be healed. A sinister voice interrupts, mocking that Kanata's screams will sound rather pretty, while she firmly resolves to at least help Feel escape. Accepting her grim fate, Feel silently acknowledges that this brutal doom must be her divine punishment. She grimly realizes that she is finally paying the ultimate price for abandoning her true friend. Wondering if Ray would be happy watching his backstabbers die, she mentally questions what he would think if he saw them now. Closing her eyes in pure resignation, she tragically hopes that he will find some peace in their horrific demise. Reflecting on her painful past, Feel recalls that people always hated witches with demon blood, which ultimately made her too terrified of dying to save Ray. She painfully admits that her paralyzing fear of being cast aside made her completely selfish, allowing her primal fear of death to override her desire to save him. Embracing the inevitable slaughter, she firmly believes that this horrific massacre is her rightful and just punishment. Kanata desperately screams Fail's name, just as the fallen witch whispers a final, apologetic thought to Ray, suddenly gasping awake in a cold sweat. A completely disoriented survivor frantically wonders where they are. Groggily piecing together their fractured memories, they remember that they were just fighting the terrifying undead terror. Realizing the vicious monsters are completely gone, a heavy and exhausted sigh of relief escapes their trembling lips. A sudden, violent wave of panic hits as the survivor looks down and realizes their right arm is completely missing. The sheer horror amplifies tenfold when they notice their left leg has also been entirely severed. An unfamiliar voice abruptly chimes in, calmly observing that the Vidrador boy is finally awake. Introducing himself as the head of the medical clinic, the strange doctor notes that the painkillers and magic must be working based on Loki's shocked reaction. Panicking, Loki begs the clinic head to heal his missing limbs for any amount of money, only to be told that the doctor cannot perform such a miracle but knows someone who can. The doctor casually drops a bombshell, revealing that the only person capable of this incredible feat is Ray Din Huel, the very boy Loki supposedly killed. Completely shattered by this impossible revelation, Loki can only utter confused and breathless gasps. Frantically denying that he killed Ray, Loki desperately asks if the doctor is truly saying that only his discarded healer can save him. Now desperately defending himself, Loki declares that he is the king-acknowledged leader of Gunkino Donghua and insists that killing comrades is a serious crime. An imposing figure sharply cuts through his pathetic excuses, bluntly stating a single, damning number. The interrogator continues pressing the arrogant leader, pointing out a grim statistic from the past 5 years. Highlighting the absurdly high mortality rate of white mages in Loki's party, the interrogator questions how 5 heavily protected healers managed to die. The truth is finally laid bare as the interrogator reveals Kanata's report, exposing that Loki cowardly used his own healer as a human shield to avoid death. Stammering in sheer panic, Loki attempts to explain himself as he is further accused of selling out the rest of his friends to the monsters. A furious voice suddenly interrupts the tense interrogation. Boiling with pure rage over the murder of their precious friends, the speaker aggressively vows that Loki will absolutely not escape unpunished. Trembling under the crushing weight of their righteous anger, the corrupt leader shrinks back in absolute terror. Scoffing at Loki's confusion regarding his comrades, the interrogator coldly dismisses him by declaring his career as an adventurer completely finished. A chilling question hangs in the air as attention finally shifts to the gruesome fates of the remaining party members. Suglinst, the brutal warrior, has been severely incapacitated and reduced to a permanent comatose state. Himeno fared no better, suffering agonizing blindness along with the gruesome loss of her left arm and left leg. Fail, the dark mage, has completely vanished into the abyss and is presumed utterly dead. The once proud party of Gunkino Donghua, which Loki boasted about so arrogantly, has been completely decimated. Delivering the final crushing blow to Loki's ego, the interrogator officially declares that his elite party is entirely over. The chapter opens in tense, eerie silence as the scene sets itself for an impending confrontation. A lingering quiet hangs heavy in the atmosphere, building a palpable sense of dreadful suspense. The calm is abruptly shattered as sudden movement violently erupts from the deep shadows. A horrifying screech heavily echoes through the air as a monstrous entity mockingly screams for its prey to come play. Facing the terrifying beast, Ray fiercely curses the creature for being a highly adaptable liquid-type monster. The amorphous horror bubbles and writhes grotesquely as it rapidly shifts its foul liquid form. Reacting with lightning speed, Ray launches a swift and incredibly decisive physical attack against the squelching monstrosity. Frustrated by the complete lack of damage, he realizes the creature can regenerate immediately no matter how many times he brutally cuts it. Analyzing its endless stamina, he grimly notes that the beast doesn't seem to be running low on magic power either. Staring at its massive form, Ray wonders just how many unfortunate humans and monsters this abomination has consumed to gain such immense strength. The liquid creature surges forward aggressively, forcing the young mage to completely focus on rapid evasive maneuvers. Despite the overwhelming odds against him, Ray grits his teeth and resolves to find a critical weakness. Barely dodging another highly lethal strike, he continuously evaluates the terrifying combat situation unfolding before him. Confused by the anomaly, he loudly questions why a monster of this insanely high tier is lurking in this specific location of all places. The ferocious beast violently attacks again, narrowly missing the highly agile adventurer. Recognizing the horror before him, Ray correctly identifies it as the undead terror, a creature often feared as the reciter of the dead. He recalls that these terrifying abominations are high-tier monsters that mainly live exclusively around the Demon Lord's castle. Leaping over another massive strike, he firmly notes that one would normally never encounter such a high-ranking beast out here. The creature violently reforms its liquid body, continuously re-emphasizing its entirely unnatural presence so far from the demon stronghold. Piecing the strange clues together, Ray deduces that the monster unnecessarily released a massive amount of magic power earlier, specifically to lure him in. A chilling thought suddenly crosses his mind as he wonders if he is actively being tested by an unseen, powerful force. Narrowing his eyes at the bubbling horror, he questions if someone is deliberately using this monstrous entity to gauge his true combat strength. Confident in his rapid deduction, Ray quickly begins to form a terrifying hypothesis about his hidden adversary. He logically reasons that the observer must be a high-ranking demon or something incredibly similar to possess the sheer power required to fully control an undead terror. Scanning the shadowy battlefield, he realizes with absolute certainty that this powerful master must be closely watching him from somewhere nearby. Formulating a brand new strategy, Ray decides he must drastically change his approach to this highly dangerous encounter. Acknowledging that he has absolutely no means to track the hidden observer, he concludes it would be incredibly detrimental to prolong the battle any further. Furthermore, he fondly remembers that Liana is anxiously waiting nearby for his safe return. Torn between keeping his abilities completely hidden and finishing the fight quickly, he assesses the undead terror as an overwhelming S+ rated threat. Stealing his absolute resolve, Ray completely drops his guard and firmly decides it is finally time to get serious. Gathering his immense magical energy, he swiftly prepares to unleash a truly devastating counterattack against the liquid beast. The dark cavern violently illuminates as raw, unchecked magical power furiously surges from Ray's determined form. Unleashing his true, hidden strength, he aggressively strikes the monstrous undead terror with an absolutely overwhelming magical force. The terrifying creature violently convulses as the sheer magnitude of Ray's magical attack completely overwhelms its liquid defenses. Brilliant light aggressively tears through the cavern, absolutely annihilating the regenerating horror in a single devastating flash. The sheer impact of the immense spell rapidly obliterates the massive beast. completely erasing its foul presence from the chaotic battlefield. Dust and debris fiercely explode outward as the massive magical shockwave heavily rattles the surrounding dungeon walls. As the blinding light slowly fades into nothing, the once terrifying S+ monster is permanently reduced to absolutely nothing. The chaotic battlefield finally falls completely silent, leaving only the highly devastating aftermath of Rei's incredible magical power. Standing entirely victorious amidst the utter destruction, Rei quietly prepares to reunite with his anxiously waiting companion. Identifying the undead terror's fatal weakness, Rei successfully pinpoints its hidden core, locking his sights squarely on the highly vulnerable target. He prepares to strike with absolute, pinpoint accuracy. Channeling his immense energy, he unleashes a devastating magical technique called Aura Lance Ray to end the brutal fight in a single blow. He boldly declares his unyielding intention to completely finish off the terrifying monster once and for all. Unleashing his gathered power, the blinding magical attack violently pierces through the heavy air straight toward the creature. A massive flash of pure destructive energy violently erupts as the devastating strike lands a flawless, direct hit. The sheer, overwhelming force of the kinetic blast violently shatters the monster's supposedly indestructible core into jagged pieces. A chaotic, echoing explosion completely engulfs the monstrous beast, instantly obliterating its imposing form. The thick battlefield dust slowly begins to settle over the completely obliterated remains of their terrifying enemy. Inspecting the leftover core fragments, Rei realizes he can use them to craft a potent weapon or sell them for a hefty profit, quickly pocketing the valuable spoils. A sudden sound abruptly catches his attention, snapping his focus back to the immediate surroundings. Whimpering in absolute disbelief, Liana stammers out that he actually managed to obliterate the legendary undead terror in a mere instant. Overjoyed by his swift and decisive victory, she loudly praises Rei's absolutely incredible combat skills. She enthusiastically highlights how he effortlessly dodged the lightning-fast tentacles and miraculously shattered the monster's core with a single strike. Chuckling modestly, Rei casually downplays his amazing physical feat by calmly explaining he has fought these specific creatures several times before. He notes that undead terrors regularly roam the middle floors of Yggdrasil's labyrinth, acknowledging their deadly strength while hinting at his own vast survival experience. Remembering his grueling past, he bluntly states that the terrifying monsters dwelling on the lower floors were significantly stronger than this beast. Believing the immediate danger has finally passed, Liana cheerfully suggests they safely set up camp for the night and depart early the next morning. The weary duo slowly begins to relax, allowing the suffocating tension of the deadly battlefield to finally fade away. They take a highly well-deserved moment of quiet peace to fully recover their drastically drained stamina. Snapped out of his deep thoughts by Liana calling his name, Rei quickly apologizes and hurries over to join her side. He casually acknowledges her presence as he finally settles into the quiet and secure campsite. Suddenly shifting the peaceful conversation, Rei warmly asks Liana if she would like to eat some sweet treats together once they finally reach the capital. Revealing his deep personal love for desserts, he happily proposes they sell the valuable core to fund a fun trip to a great sweet shop he knows. Blushing slightly, Liana shyly agrees to the sweet date, softly admitting she would love to go if he truly doesn't mind her company. Grinning widely with genuine excitement, Rei excitedly declares their delicious plans officially decided. He warmly tells her to eagerly look forward to their upcoming and highly anticipated treat. As the sun completely sets, they decide to use their current hidden location to rest before a sudden shout violently breaks the peace. Alarmed by her sharp shout, Rei quickly asks if she spotted another monster, but she excitedly points out a nearby village instead. She joyfully repeats her amazing discovery of a hidden human settlement lying just in the distance. A large, heavily fortified village surrounded by massive stone walls slowly comes into clear and triumphant view. Staring in awe at the impressive defensive structure, Rei confidently confirms that it is undoubtedly a human village. Overwhelmed with immense emotional relief, Liana suddenly collapses, prompting Rei to frantically check on her physical well-being. She quickly reassures him that she is completely fine and simply lost her strength from the sudden wave of intense relief washing over her cells. So I see. Rei gently comforts her, noting it is perfectly natural to be thoroughly exhausted after getting violently lost and walking since the early morning. Observing the impressive architecture, Rei analytically explains that the massive walls are likely infused with divine power to specifically protect the vulnerable villagers from deadly monster attacks. Reinvigorated by their incredibly lucky find, Rei enthusiastically urges Liana to help him locate the main gate. The tired, but incredibly hopeful duo carefully makes their way along the massive, imposing stone fortifications. Finding a massive fortified barrier, they quickly conclude it must be the sole safe entrance and exit to the isolated settlement. Taking the brave initiative, Liana boldly volunteers to approach the imposing gate guards and respectfully ask for safe entry. Halting their progress, a commanding voice suddenly yells out for them to wait. Turning her attention to her companion, the girl listens as he begins to explain the situation. Ray clarifies that the massive gate and surrounding walls are constructed entirely of pure divine power. He elaborates that this holy barrier violently rejects any being possessing monstrous or demonic magic. The intimidating, magical surface of the towering wall hums with an overwhelming protective energy. Adding a grave warning, Ray notes that the powerful gate can even reject humans under certain circumstances. Blaming her lack of knowledge on her inexperience, he warmly reassures Liana that the gate's primary purpose is merely to repel monsters. A tense silence falls over the duo as a stern, unblinking gaze fixates directly upon them from the shadows. Examining the sudden magical phenomenon, Ray identifies it as the Divine Gate's Eye, a spell designed to scan incoming presences. The mystical eye glows with intense divine energy as it thoroughly analyzes the two travelers standing before the barrier. Releasing a sigh of relief, Ray confidently concludes that they are officially allowed to proceed inside. The massive, heavy doors of the divine barrier slowly rumble open to grant them passage. Gasping in awe, Liana excitedly calls out to Ray as the imposing entrance finally yields. Stepping forward from the shadows, the gatekeeper formally acknowledges that the two travelers are indeed human. Reaffirming his assessment, the Guardian carefully studies the duo, standing safely within the gate's perimeter. The formidable sentinel remains poised and alert, evaluating the newcomers with seasoned expertise. Apologizing for his extreme caution, the guard admits he initially mistook them for disguised demons due to a massive magical reaction. Lowering his guard, the imposing knight respectfully drops to one knee to show his sincere remorse. Standing tall, he introduces himself as Atra, a diamond-rank holy knight and the designated divine treekeeper of the village. Deeply impressed by his credentials, Ray praises the young knight for achieving such an esteemed position at his age. Modestly brushing off the high praise, Atra laughs and claims he is still incredibly inexperienced and merely got lucky. Narrowing his eyes slightly, Ray silently processes the knight's humble dismissal of his own immense talent. Analyzing Atra's fluid movements, Ray correctly deduces that activating the powerful divine gate requires exceptional control over divine energy. The experienced traveler mentally concludes that this young knight's abilities are definitely far more than just sheer luck. Recognizing the underlying strength of the gatekeeper, Ray accepts Atra's heartfelt apology for the earlier misunderstanding. Offering a gesture of goodwill, Atra promises to secure them a discounted inn-room since all the local restaurants are closed for the night. Politely thanking the young knight for letting them in so late, Ray officially introduces himself and Liana. Reacting with sheer disbelief, Atra expresses genuine surprise that they managed to survive wandering through the dangerous forest. Chuckling awkwardly at the knight's shock, Ray humbly agrees that they were indeed incredibly lucky. Realizing the severity of the situation, Atra decides it is time to reveal the grim truth to the unsuspecting travelers. Dropping his cheerful demeanor, the young knight solemnly confesses that the village is currently suffering from a massive crisis. Exchanging a worried glance, the travelers urge Atra to explain the nature of this mysterious and devastating problem. Atra grimly reveals that a wicked demon has been relentlessly targeting the terrified village for several months. Elaborating on the horrifying threat, he asks if they have ever heard of the vicious creature known as a werewolf. He tragically explains that the helpless humans living in the village have been thoroughly terrorized by this relentless beast. When Ray questions the monster's strength, Atra bluntly states they would absolutely be dead if they had encountered it in the woods. Pondering the tactical response, Ray asks why the country has not dispatched a Holy Knight unit to deal with a C-rank threat. Putting the pieces together, Ray chillingly deduces that the dispatched forces must have completely failed to defeat the monster. Startled by Ray's sharp intuition, Atra nervously confirms that 4 elite diamond-rank Holy Knights were indeed sent to assist. Delivering the final, crushing blow, the young gatekeeper reveals that every single one of those elite knights was brutally slaughtered by the werewolf. Shocked by the grim news, a fierce reaction erupts over the revelation that all of the dispatched knights had fallen. The tension rapidly spikes as the speaker grimly reveals that there were actually 3 werewolves lurking in the shadows. Describing their desperate situation, the villager explains that they are completely isolated, unable to seek help, and rapidly running out of food. With the 4 holy knights having vanished without a trace, the village is left entirely hopeless and unsure if they can survive until reinforcements arrive. Breaking the heavy silence, the nervous speaker stammers as they respectfully call out to Ray for guidance. Staring forward with a troubled expression, the villager hints that the immediate werewolf threat is merely the beginning of their nightmare. Hesitantly preparing his guest for more shocking news, he admits that they are facing another unbelievable crisis within their borders. The horrifying truth drops as he reveals that the innocent people of the village have been mysteriously disappearing one after another. Elaborating on the sheer terror, he explains that these traceless, silent kidnappings began months ago when the werewolf first appeared, leading the local chief to foolishly assume the two events are unrelated. Narrowing his eyes, Ray immediately questions if the speaker disagrees with the village chief's naive conclusion. Looking down with grim certainty, the villager nods hesitantly and confirms Rei's sharp suspicion, voicing his darkest fear. He bravely asserts his belief that a hidden spy working with the werewolves is operating from within the village. A thick, ominous silence completely settles over the narrative as the heavy weight of this internal betrayal sinks in. Meanwhile, in the deep shadows, a sinister figure questions if the white-haired man they observed was truly the warrior who managed to defeat Vegan. A loyal subordinate bows deeply in the darkness. Respectfully addressing this dark entity as Alfurk, an overwhelming aura of pure malice radiates from Alfurk, who is finally introduced to the world as one of the legendary 4 deadly demons. A familiar voice suddenly calls out to Liz with bright enthusiasm. Gratefully accepting the delivery, the station guard thanks the children as they cheerfully announce they brought his dinner. The children giggle happily in response to the warm and welcoming reception. Confused by the sudden appearance of the kids, the newcomer curiously asks Atra if they are his own children. The guard clarifies that Liz and Shu are actually the local innkeeper's kids, just as the energetic duo loudly introduces themselves. Boldly stepping forward, one of the curious children excitedly asks the strangers for their names. Liana stammers nervously while Rei calmly and politely introduces himself to the energetic kids. Beaming with innocent joy, the cheerful children warmly welcome the newcomers to their home. Caught entirely off guard by their infectious energy, Liana awkwardly returns the friendly greeting. Atra explains that he heavily relies on the children to deliver his daily meals because his strict duties prevent him from leaving his guard post. Nodding in genuine understanding, Rei kindly praises the kids for being so incredibly helpful and amazing. Bursting with immense pride, the children cheer joyfully at the unexpected and uplifting compliment. Remembering their business, Atra asks Shu and Liz to guide the travelers to their inn, noting that their mother will be absolutely thrilled to finally have guests. The children gasp in sheer excitement at the wonderful prospect of making their mother genuinely happy. Smiling warmly down at them, Atra confidently assures the duo that their mother will be entirely overjoyed. Eager to help, the kids enthusiastically grab Liana's hands and begin dragging her away in a sudden, comical panic. The energetic children swiftly lead the highly startled travelers through the winding village streets. Following close behind, Rei calmly observes the sights of the quaint and remarkably quiet settlement. Recalling an earlier conversation, Atra had previously mentioned that this highly recommended inn is actually managed directly by the children's mother. He had highly praised the modest establishment for its excellent affordability and wonderfully large baths. Agreeing with the solid recommendation, Rei firmly decides they will stay there for the night, since there is absolutely no reason to refuse. The small group continues their brief, peaceful journey toward the welcoming establishment. Approaching their final destination, the wooden building slowly comes fully into view. They finally arrive at the doorstep of the modest but incredibly cozy-looking village inn. Bursting through the front doors, the panting children loudly announce the miraculous arrival of new customers. Startled by the loud entrance, the innkeeper gasps in absolute shock at the mere mention of actual guests. Panting heavily as she rushes to the front desk, the flustered owner introduces herself as Shinoka and awkwardly attempts to welcome them. While the kids laugh playfully at their mother's breathless state, Rei politely apologizes for the incredibly sudden visit. Expressing her deep gratitude, Shinoka openly admits her immense surprise that they safely reached the village, despite the wicked demons wandering outside. Noting their incredibly good fortune, Rei casually asks if the specific demons she mentioned happen to be the rumored werewolves. Amazed by their safe passage, Shinoka grimly reveals that the village men who previously tried to seek outside help were all immediately slaughtered. She repeatedly praises their sheer luck, deeply emphasizing that the terrifying werewolves possess a highly lethal sense of smell. Analyzing the grim situation, Rei logically deduces that if the beasts truly have keen noses, they must be completely surrounding the village and undoubtedly notice their arrival to speed. Mentally questioning if the demons were simply away, Rei suspiciously recalls his own sharp senses detecting absolutely nothing on the road, while Shinoka kindly offers to guide them to their room. Gesturing toward the wooden stairs, Shinoka politely informs the weary travelers that their room is located on the second floor. Before retiring for the night, Rei stops her to specifically ask for highly detailed information regarding the tragic casualties the village has suffered recently. Agreeing to share the grim history, Shinoka solemnly prepares to organize her thoughts and tell the harrowing tale. She tragically explains that the horrible nightmare began 3 months ago, when a young female hunter completely vanished outside Vaden village. The horrifying truth was discovered the very next day when her severed head was found at the Divine Gate, clearly indicating the savage beasts had completely devoured her body. Desperate to end the monstrous threat, the village men quickly formed a brave subjugation unit, but tragically, every single one of them died in the ensuing brutal battle. A grim report details how another group of men seeking help and 3 holy knights dispatched to subjugate the werewolves were all completely annihilated. A villager solemnly recalls Atra mentioning the deeply unsettling, disappearing case just a few days later. The quiet listener softly confirms this terrifying revelation. They grimly note that the strange series of disappearances apparently started right around that exact time. Deepening the dark mystery, a staggering total of 28 male villagers have completely vanished without leaving a single trace behind. Despite the village being heavily protected by the Divine Gate and showing zero signs of werewolf infiltration, the baffling disappearances continue to shock the locals. Because of these seemingly impossible circumstances, Atra firmly believes a hidden spy is secretly operating inside the village walls. The timeline makes it incredibly hard to believe the events are unrelated, since the people started vanishing right after the werewolves appeared. Trembling at the terrifying thought of a spy in their midst, Liana nervously asks if Rai shares this horrifying suspicion. She stammers slightly as she nervously questions his thoughts on a potential traitor hiding among the villagers. Analyzing the grim facts, Rai calmly deduces the culprit is either a disguised werewolf or a highly dangerous demon. A polite knock suddenly interrupts their tense conversation as someone happily announces that dinner is finally ready. The heavy wooden door gently swings open to reveal their smiling host standing in the doorway. Two young children cautiously peek into the room, with wide, intensely curious eyes. Surprised by the incredibly generous spread, Liana hesitantly asks if it is really okay to serve them so much food during a known shortage. Acknowledging the strict food scarcity, the host warmly insists they not hold back, since they are the very first paying customers in months. Gratefully accepting the hearty meal, Rai respectfully thanks the host before she politely excuses herself from the room. Turning his absolute attention to the feast, Rai eagerly suggests they finally start eating. He suddenly notices the two children silently staring at the delicious food with intense, unmistakable longing. A loud stomach growl embarrasses one of the children, prompting a heavily flustered apology as they admit the food simply smells too good. The children sadly reveal they are only allowed a single piece of bread for dinner, having already completely finished their meager share, smiling warmly. Rai gently calls both of the incredibly hungry children over to the table, claiming he actually isn't hungry. He generously asks if they could eat his entire share instead, instantly lighting up their hopeful faces. He playfully offers them the delicious food under one specific condition, making them eagerly ask what the promise entails. Holding up a single finger, he strictly instructs them to share the meal completely equally between the two of them. Bursting with sheer joy, the children enthusiastically agree to his kind and generous terms. The frantic mother suddenly bursts back in, loudly scolding the children for foolishly bothering their paying customers. Rai quickly waves off her intense panic, smoothly explaining that he explicitly told the kids to eat his food. Flustered by his overwhelming generosity, she nervously offers to deduct the meal's cost from their payment, but Rai firmly insists she take the full amount. He kindly reassures the anxious mother that it is perfectly fine, since she already served the food to him anyway. Overwhelmed by his profound kindness, the mother bows deeply and offers her absolute most sincere thanks. Shifting the quiet topic, Rai calmly mentions noticing that Atra, the divine tree keeper, seems incredibly close with her children. She happily confirms this sharp observation, expressing deep gratitude for how attached the children have become to him through their frequent play. Rai softly suggests that Atra is likely just as thankful to have the energetic kids around. He reasonably assumes that the children regularly delivering delicious food must bring the lonely keeper immense daily joy. He reflects thoughtfully on the gentle, unspoken bond forged between the solitary man and the caring children. Caught slightly off guard by his profound insight, the mother nervously agrees with his accurate assessment. A heavy, suffocating sadness suddenly enters her voice as she reveals that Atra once had a beautiful family living in another town. Her expression darkens completely as she solemnly explains they were all brutally murdered at the wicked hands of demons. She tearfully adds the heartbreaking detail that his violently lost children were exactly around the same age as her own Shu and Liz. Processing the tragic information, Rai realizes that the man has lost the people most important to him. He learns the man chose to stay and protect the village as the divine tree keeper, even after being warned that danger was approaching his family. The villagers express their deep and unwavering gratitude for his massive sacrifice. Connecting the emotional dots, Rai finally understands why the guardian is so closely bonded with the children Shu and Liz. He ponders the crushing weight of the man's burden as he continues to fight valiantly despite losing his family. A heavy, solemn silence hangs over the village as the tragic history settles into Rai's mind. Shifting his focus back to the present, Rai decides it is finally time to move on and rest. Exhausted from the journey, he states that he just needs to take a hot bath and get some sleep. He casts a subtle, calculating glance toward his young female companion. Rai internally laments the current lodging situation. Admitting he actually wanted to book separate rooms, he notes that Liana absolutely refused to be separated, creating a slightly problematic room-sharing scenario. Flustered by the intimate arrangement, he awkwardly attempts to remind Liana that sharing a room with a grown man is highly inappropriate. Giving up on winning the argument, He decides he will simply sleep on the hard floor and let her have the comfortable bed. A sudden shift in Liana's demeanor immediately catches his sharp attention. He silently observes the young girl looking visibly downcast and deeply troubled. Noticing her dark mood, he asks if her stomach hurts or if the meal tasted bad, but she frantically insists the food was delicious. She hesitates nervously, struggling to find the right words to express her inner turmoil. Rei looks at her in gentle confusion, waiting patiently for her to explain what is bothering her. She guiltily points out that the food he so generously gave to the children was actually supposed to be his own meal. Worrying that he might collapse from starvation, she voices her concern, but he brushes it off by claiming he easily survives on dried meat. Gripping her clothes tightly, Liana offers a deeply sincere and emotional apology for eating while he went hungry. A moment of heavy, understanding silence passes between them as he completely absorbs her profound guilt. Gently reassuring her, he explains that his unique constitution prevents frequent hunger and firmly tells her she does not need to apologize. Lowering his voice to a soft whisper, he reveals that he also experienced the harsh, unforgiving life of a slave when he was a child. He recounts the painful memories of constantly starving because his cruel captors never provided enough food to survive. A fond, nostalgic expression crosses his face as he remembers a very special person who saved him during those dark times. He warmly recalls how a fellow slave girl constantly shared her meager food rations with him so he could grow bigger and stronger. He reflects on her incredible selflessness, knowing in his heart that she must have been starving just as much as he was. Inspired by her unforgettable kindness, he proudly declares that it is finally his turn to emulate her generosity and help others. Deeply moved by his tragic but heartwarming story, Liana softly praises Rei as a truly kind and wonderful person. Caught completely off guard by her genuine compliment, he awkwardly stammers and questions if he really is all that kind as Surters. She firmly assures him that the starving children will never forget the incredible kindness he showed them today. Smiling softly at her savior, she adds that his utterly selfless actions were absolutely wonderful to witness. Observing her cautious behavior, Rei internally notes that Liana has a strong, persistent tendency to worry deeply about other people's opinions of her. He analyzes her timid nature, recognizing that she rarely speaks spontaneously and constantly tries to flatter others out of a lingering, deep-seated fear. The grim realization hits him that these protective, submissive behavioral quirks are a direct result of being raised as a helpless slave. He tragically deduces that she was likely subjected to strict, agonizing training and extreme hardships to become a high-class, luxurious slave Tim. He recognizes the deep psychological wounds she actively hides as a desperate protective measure to avoid suffering any further pain. A massive surge of empathy washes over him as he realizes her current trauma perfectly mirrors the intense pain he suffered in his own past. Resolving to protect her at all costs, he acknowledges that while she still bears the physical marks of slavery, she is ultimately just a young 12-year-old girl who is finally free from her cruel constraints. Harboring a deep resolve, he vows to remove the restrictive chains holding her back so she can finally live her life freely. Calling out Liana's name, he gently catches the nervous young girl's immediate attention. He firmly clarifies that although they made a magical contract together, he refuses to act as her master. Confused by his sudden declaration, Liana stammers in hesitation as he continues his heartfelt explanation. Reaching out to gently comfort her, he warmly reassures the frightened girl that she has no reason to be so terrified. Watching her timid reaction, he silently hopes she will eventually find the courage to forge her own independent path. He explicitly wishes for her to live as a free individual rather than a bound slave, a sentiment she softly and hesitantly accepts. Until that promised day of true independence arrives, he internally vows to stay by her side and fiercely protect her. Taking a brief moment to relax, he exhales a breath of relief and genuinely appreciates the peaceful atmosphere. He casually observes their quiet surroundings, noting that the area would normally be crowded if the terrifying werewolf incident had not occurred. His peaceful reflection is suddenly interrupted by a nervous, stammering voice hesitantly calling out for his attention. He turns around in surprise as a strange, prolonged noise unexpectedly echoes through the quiet space. A sudden, shocked scream violently shatters the peace of the quiet inn. An agitated voice screams out, demanding to know why her companion didn't get in the bath first. Flustered and completely unclothed, Liana nervously stammers out Rei's name in the steaming water. Caught entirely off guard, Rei stares blankly ahead in utter, paralyzing confusion. Pure panic instantly sets in as the highly embarrassing situation fully registers in his mind. Blushing furiously, he desperately yells out an apology while recoiling violently in shock. Trying to explain herself, Liana awkwardly admits she only wanted to help wash his body, while Rei internally screams over the absurd situation. Frantically waving his hands, Rei insists he isn't her master and fiercely rejects her unnecessary servitude. Gripping her towel tightly, Liana sadly confesses her deep worry over feeling completely useless despite all his generous help. Pleading with desperate eyes, she begs him to at least let her do whatever she can to repay his immense kindness. Pausing to reflect, Ray realizes he understands her crushing sense of inadequacy all too well. Recalling his own desperate past of overworking just to be needed, he firmly resolves to ease her painful anxieties. Yielding to her earnest request, he gently agrees and asks her to simply wash his back. A heavy, highly awkward silence fills the steamy room as they both adjust to the deeply intimate situation. Liana instantly brightens and enthusiastically promises to clean his entire body, causing Ray to panic again as she steps way too close. Beaming with immense pride, she ignores his flustered protests and loudly declares her excellent cleaning skills. Desperately trying to grab a towel, Ray is aggressively ushered forward by the highly eager girl. Scrubbing his back, Liana anxiously asks if it hurts, relaxing instantly when he happily assures her the pressure is absolutely perfect. The warm water continuously splashes as they share a surprisingly peaceful moment in the steaming bath. Thick steam gently billows around them, slowly washing away the heavy exhaustion of their incredibly long journey. Carefully washing his back, Liana works with entirely focused and dedicated precision. Breaking the comfortable silence, Liana nervously speaks up to softly grab his attention. Staring intently, she asks if he could possibly defeat the highly dangerous werewolves currently threatening the village. Confidently noting they are weaker than the undead terror, Ray admits fighting 3 beasts at once would still be slightly troublesome. He carefully explains his real concern is their incredible speed, noting that if even one agile werewolf escapes, it will immediately call for deadly reinforcements. Repeating his flawless logic, he heavily emphasizes that werewolves strictly reside far away in the distant demon realm. He explains that massive, large-scale barriers normally prevent dangerous demons from crossing directly into human territory. A sudden, brilliant realization begins to dawn on Liana as she rapidly processes his heavy words. Connecting the scattered dots, Ray concludes the demonic beasts must have bypassed the magical barriers entirely. Shocked by the horrifying implication, Liana gasps and begins to remember a crucial piece of hidden lore. She quickly apologizes for interrupting, but Ray gently encourages the flustered girl to continue her important thought. Gathering her thoughts, Liana explains the 2 types of demons and logically deduces that the werewolves must have emerged directly from a dungeon. Snapping his fingers in total agreement, Ray confirms the existence of a massive dungeon secretly linking both realms. Liana recalls that an SS-Rank party discovered this hidden route 3 years ago, though the government fiercely kept its exact location a closely guarded secret. Pondering this dark revelation, Ray silently deduces that the terrifying undead terror likely used this exact secret route. A chilling realization hits his mind as he realizes countless highly dangerous monsters might have already flooded deep into the human realm. Smiling warmly, he sincerely thanks Liana for providing such incredibly helpful and vital information. Basking entirely in his gentle praise, Liana blushes heavily while relaxing in the steaming water. The two completely unwind and continue to silently soak, entirely enveloped in the comforting heat of the relaxing bath. Panicking wildly, Ray screams in sheer shock as Liana aggressively attempts to wash his chest. The village chief, Oki Yusei, suddenly interrupts their chaotic moment, politely apologizing for disturbing the travelers late at night. Waving off their concerns, the chief solemnly clarifies that he is there to discuss the looming werewolf threat. He gravely confirms that their fragile village is currently being directly threatened by a dangerous pack of werewolves. Detailing their bleak reality, he reveals they are trapped, impoverished, starving, and mourning the knights who died defending them. He grimly admits that despite the divine gate saving them from immediate annihilation, the village's complete destruction is only a matter of time. Pleading desperately, the chief asks the travelers a massive favor to inform the royal knights about their dire situation once they leave. He quickly clarifies that he is only asking this heavy favor if they actually decide to depart from the village. Fully understanding the gravity of his desperate request, Ray solemnly agrees to carry the message. He firmly promises to submit a formal rescue request since they are already heading straight toward the royal capital. Overwhelmed with profound gratitude, the tearful chief deeply thanks them for being the village's only remaining hope. Shifting the serious tone, the chief clarifies he isn't trying to rush them, but mentions he received an urgent message. Surprised by the sudden update, Ray questions the message and learns it came directly from the divine treekeeper, Atra. Ray pauses in mild confusion, verifying if the keeper's specific message was actually meant for him. The chief explains that Atra highly recommends leaving tonight since he currently senses no werewolves nearby. Adding a sinister warning, he notes the urgency is heightened because people in the village have been mysteriously vanishing at night. Ray acknowledges the terrifying disappearance incident, confirming he already heard the grim rumors from Atra and Shinoka. The chief solemnly reiterates the baffling fact that only male villagers have been completely vanishing without a trace. Pondering the chilling mystery, the chief openly struggles to understand why the kidnappings strictly target men. He tiredly confesses his absolute ignorance regarding the dark truth behind the ongoing tragedy. Despite the internal danger, he firmly warns that the werewolves outside remain the far greater threat. Unsure of how to proceed, a nervous Liana asks Ray what their next move should be. Ray analytically weighs his severely limited options, comparing the werewolf threat against the bizarre disappearance incident. He continues to deeply ponder the sinister connection between the three beasts and the vanishing villagers. Apologizing to the exhausted Liana, Ray firmly declares his intent to leave immediately, which she fiercely and loyally supports. The village children abruptly interrupt the tense planning, sadly asking if the travelers are genuinely leaving already. Their frantic mother instantly bursts into the room, loudly scolding Shu and Liz for disobeying her orders to stay put. The heartbroken children express their deep disappointment, having eagerly hoped to play and talk with their new friends tonight. Gently patting their heads, Ray warmly apologizes for cutting their precious time so short. He kindly promises to visit the village again for a playdate, while Liana enthusiastically invites them to join her next time. Bursting with sudden joy, the innocent children happily agree to the heartwarming future promise. As the mother nervously scolds the children for being unreasonable, the chief shifts his attention back to Ray. Pausing before finalizing their departure, Ray firmly tells the village chief he has one final question to ask. The chief patiently stands in tense silence, fully prepared to answer whatever question the traveler has. Swiftly moving out, the duo taps their boots against the ground as they begin their midnight escape. Standing just outside the village, Ray respectfully apologizes to Atra for their incredibly short notice. The calm keeper gently reassures them that the abrupt timing is perfectly fine. Atra gravely warns that while midnight travel is highly dangerous, missing this safe window might mean being permanently trapped. Recognizing the immense burden he placed on them, Atra sincerely apologizes to the brave travelers. While Liana kindly tells him not to apologize, Ray skeptically questions if Atra truly cannot feel the werewolves' lingering presence. A quiet confirmation escapes. Into the tense atmosphere as the situation becomes clear, Atra explains that he used his aura to scout the perimeter, confirming the dangerous werewolves are temporarily away due to unforeseen circumstances. Ray silently absorbs this crucial tactical intelligence and contemplates their next move, urging them to act quickly. The young knight advises the travelers to seize this rare window of opportunity and leave immediately. Ray and Liana bow respectfully, expressing their profound gratitude for the village's generous hospitality. They apologize for their incredibly abrupt departure, while Atra warmly waves off their concerns. Calculating the distance, the knight notes they can clear the werewolf territory within an hour and wishes them a safe journey to the royal capital. He urgently requests that the travelers alert the capital's dispatched knights the moment they arrive. Nodding firmly, Ray promises to deliver the critical message to the kingdom's forces. The heavy gates seal behind the departing travelers, leaving the village enveloped in an eerie silence. A sudden menacing footstep breaks the quiet as a dark silhouette emerges from the deep shadows. Gloating that the powerful hindrance has finally left, the hidden werewolves eagerly prepare to torture and devour the helpless villagers. A monstrous beast sadistically remarks that simple slaughter is boring, claiming the meal is much better when accompanied by screams of pure terror. Grumbling in absolute disbelief, one of the monsters still refuses to accept that the mighty vegan actually lost to such an ordinary human. Another pack member strictly commands him to obey Alfurk's direct orders and leave the departing travelers alone. Drooling with unhinged greed, a demon suggests ignoring the man but hunting down the woman for her high-quality magical essence. A cautious werewolf fiercely rejects the idea, warning that wasting time on the travelers will inevitably draw the kingdom's patrolling knights. Realizing the ticking clock, the monsters calculate that they must quickly devour the entire settlement before the royal patrols arrive. The greedy beast reluctantly accepts this tactical reality and shifts his predatory focus back to the village. They gleefully celebrate the end of their tedious, stealthy kidnappings, thrilled to finally hunt in the open. Licking his chops, one monster excitedly announces his plan to hunt down a specific group of children he has been eyeing for weeks. The beasts gloat about having already eliminated the tough, foul-tasting men to properly prepare for this massive feast. Noting that only a powerless old man remains, the pack excitedly declares that tonight's menu consists entirely of delicious women and children. With a terrifying, blood-curdling roar, the monsters officially launch their brutal party. Horrified shrieks echo through the night as the monstrous pack violently bursts into the open square. Absolute panic completely consumes the settlement as the demonic beasts begin their terrifying rampage. Desperate and terrified citizens frantically scream out for the divine treekeeper to save them. Hearing the deafening chaos, Atra grips his weapon and rushes headlong toward the unfolding slaughter. The brave young knight firmly plants himself between the towering monsters and his helpless people. A villager shrieks in sheer terror as a massive beast lunges forward with bared fangs. Realizing the nightmare has arrived, a frantic citizen screams for everyone to run for their lives. A towering werewolf cruelly shatters their hopes, chillingly announcing that it is far too late for any escape. The monster mockingly reminds them that the protective divine gate is their only exit, effectively trapping everyone inside. Glaring down at the terrified humans, the beast sadistically strips the settlement of its title as a village. It gleefully explains that this place is nothing more than a giant, sealed prison designed to hold their prey. The werewolf drops a terrifying smirk. Officially dubbing the once safe haven a slaughterhouse cage, Atra desperately attempts a fierce strike, but the massive beast effortlessly grabs his weapon in midair. Taunting the struggling knight, the monster laughs at his pathetic attempt to fight back and promises to drag out his suffering. Formulating a sickening plan, the werewolf decides to torture Atra by devouring the children while forcing him to listen to their screams. Spotting Shu and Liz in the crowd, a panicking Atra desperately screams for the two children to run away. The monstrous predator easily zeroes in on the terrified siblings, its eyes locking onto its next meal. Changing its twisted mind, the beast suddenly lunges at a different target to maximize the psychological torture. A sharp knife suddenly embeds itself deep into the monster's flesh, interrupting its sadistic speech as it gapes in complete shock. Stepping out of the shadows, Ray coldly commands the beast to shut its mouth as the terrified monster instantly recognizes its attacker. Frustrated by unexpected delays, a desperate figure questions why their target hasn't left yet, while Shinka apologizes for her tardiness and expresses deep gratitude for having her life saved. Spotting an unexpected obstacle, the enraged werewolf viciously curses the sudden appearance of a white-haired brat. Staring down the monstrous beast, Ray coldly declares his intention to brutally discipline ill-mannered dogs. Furious at the arrogant insult, the werewolf fiercely lunges forward while screaming at the boy not to screw with him. A violent clash instantly erupts as the powerful demon throws its full weight into a devastating strike. Suddenly pausing mid-attack, the werewolf's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated shock. Processing the impossible reality, the beast realizes the frail-looking boy somehow flawlessly dodged his lethal attack. Panic begins to set in as the monster notes that the white-haired kid's movements are simply way too fast to track. Glancing down in utter confusion, the bewildered werewolf completely fails to understand what just happened to his body. A horrifying realization strikes him as he stares in absolute disbelief at his severed arm. Blood furiously sprays through the air as the cleanly sliced limb violently detaches from the monster's shoulder. The heavy, muscular arm forcefully plummets toward the stone ground in a bloody arc. Agonizing pain finally registers, causing the maimed werewolf to recoil violently in absolute shock. Standing entirely unbothered by the brutal maiming, Ray casually maintains his composed stance. Hitting the ground with a sickening thud, the severed demonic arm rapidly crumbles into useless dust. Coughing up dark blood, the wounded beast frantically wonders if his attacker is a holy knight, before realizing no divine power was used. Terrified by his opponent's impossible speed, the demon logically concludes that the boy's blindingly fast attack was definitively not human. Paralyzed by the sheer power gap, the werewolf knows with absolute certainty that continuing the fight will result in his immediate death. Driven purely by survival instincts, he desperately resolves to run and report this monstrous kid to his captain at the gate. Turning his back on the terrifying battle, the heavily bleeding monster sprints frantically towards safety. Pushing his wounded body to the absolute limit, he closes the distance to the designated rendezvous point. Spotting the gate ahead, the desperate werewolf loudly screams for his captain to help him. His frantic cries instantly die in his throat as a scene of absolute horror completely paralyzes him. Surveying the grim aftermath, the terrified beast realizes the white-haired kid must have already slaughtered everyone stationed here. Looming silently in the shadows, Ray completely effortlessly cuts off the demon's only escape route. A sudden, chilling noise abruptly catches the panicked werewolf's attention from behind. Turning around slowly, he discovers his terrifying pursuer standing casually mere inches away. Realizing Ray has already caught up, the horrified demon stammers as he notices a gruesome object in the boy's hand. Smiling coldly, Ray mockingly asks if he can't recognize his own friend's severed remains. Suffocating despair completely washes over the werewolf as he desperately denies the horrific reality in front of him. Staring directly at the severed head, he screams out in sheer agony upon recognizing his butchered brother. As the bloody head drops to the ground, the defeated beast realizes their entire pack was flawlessly set up by this terrifying kid. Wasting no time, Ray readies his weapon to deliver another painfully precise strike. Offering a hollow apology, the young mage coldly states he will now cut off the demon's legs to entirely prevent any further escape. Collapsing in absolute defeat, the crippled werewolf curses his cruel fate and completely shatters under his ruined expectations. The intense battle concludes without a single civilian casualty, solely thanks to Liana bravely helping the villagers evacuate in time. Surveying the secured village, Ray firmly notes that their final task is to violently unmask the hidden human collaborator. Gathering safely in the aftermath, the grateful villagers deeply thank the traveling savior for protecting their lives. Explaining his highly calculated mercy, Ray reveals he deliberately kept the werewolves alive so they could officially testify. Stunned by this incredible foresight, a villager questions exactly why he chose not to simply kill the monstrous invaders. A dark entity reminds Ray he knows the hidden collaborator's identity, urging him to kill them without hesitation. The voice harshly criticizes Ray's half-hearted mercy. Comparing it to his past mistakes against Vegan, it grimly warns that showing such foolish mercy will inevitably bring him agonizing regret. Staring into the darkness, Ray quietly notes the sinister return of that mysterious shadow. The village chief suddenly calls out to the traveler, in absolute shock and deep concern. Brushing off his own condition, the frantic chief urgently asks if Ray is hurt. He demands to know exactly how Ray predicted the sudden werewolf attack on their village. Maintaining his composure, Ray casually prepares to reveal the dark truth. He smoothly suggests the panicked chief simply direct his questions to the real culprit. Pointing accusingly, Ray boldly exposes the divine gatekeeper, pretending to be dead nearby. Absolute shock instantly paralyzes the onlookers, as the heavy accusation completely sinks in. Dropping his deceptive act, the exposed keeper clicks his tongue and confirms his guilt. Utterly betrayed, the horrified villagers struggle to comprehend Atra is their true enemy. Whispers of sheer disbelief ripple through the terrified crowd facing the fallen protector. A heartbroken villager furiously confronts Atra for secretly conspiring with the bloodthirsty werewolves. Shinoka reveals Ray warned them to watch Atra deliberately open the gate for the monsters. Sighing heavily, Atra arrogantly drops all pretenses and fully embraces his exposed role. Shifting his absolute focus toward the traveler, the corrupt keeper angrily barks Ray's name. Atra demands to know how his flawless disguise was pierced so easily by the traveler. Ray explains the incredibly strong werewolf scent clinging to Atra proved he never fought alone. Connecting the clues, Ray details how Atra's gate access undeniably made him the culprit. He further exposes Atra's blatant lies about using a high-level divine tracking technique. Scoffing, Atra cynically suggests that Ray himself might be a werewolf to possess such smell. The corrupt keeper sighs heavily again, clearly agitated that his perfect cover was shattered. Locking his furious gaze back on his target, Atra menacingly calls out to Ray. Pressing for details, the exposed traitor stubbornly questions how his brilliant deception unraveled. Ray coolly reiterates that his unusually sharp sense of smell sealed the corrupt keeper's fate. Ray firmly states that Atra's lingering monster scent was the ultimate proof of his alliance. Abandoning all reason, Atra violently erupts and boldly declares his murderous intent to slaughter everyone. Unfazed by the threat, Ray calmly asks the traitor one final question about his motives. Sweating nervously, Atra fiercely claims he only betrayed the village to ensure his own survival. He desperately attempts to justify his cowardice by emphasizing the werewolves' overwhelming, lethal strength. The corrupt keeper insists he had absolutely no choice but to strike a dark deal. Observing his highly erratic eye movements, Ray instantly realizes the panicked traitor is completely lying. Ray asks if the twisted deal involved feeding helpless villagers to the beasts for safety. The cornered traitor shamelessly confirms this horrific arrangement without a single ounce of remorse. A suffocating silence dramatically falls as the two forces silently prepare to violently clash. Atra violently sniffs the air, declaring his actual motives are completely unimportant now. Radiating pure bloodlust, the corrupt keeper aggressively promises to bring absolute ruin to everyone. Atra wickedly boasts that killing the hero will earn him a massive and highly desired promotion. Rationalizing his dark intentions, Atra states that a destroyed village wouldn't need a keeper anyway. He then sharply questions why the man standing before him originally chose to become a holy knight. Startled by the sudden inquiry, Ray lets out a confused gasp. Atra notes that attaining such power requires surviving a deadly ordeal where the body must perfectly integrate with divine energy. Ray quietly confirms the harsh and painful truth of the holy trials. Analyzing human motivation, Atra declares that anyone willing to risk their life does so either for wealth or for someone deeply important to them. Pressing further, he insists that Ray must have endured the hellish trial specifically to protect a loved one. Atra bitterly admits that he himself obtained his divine strength solely to protect the people he cherished most. Glaring intensely, Atra asks if Ray already knows the tragic fate that befell his family. Attempting to de-escalate the tension, Ray urges Atra to abandon his meaningless revenge, despite understanding his profound grief. Snapping completely, Atra furiously screams that Ray could never understand the helplessness of having everything stolen away. Consumed by absolute despair, the shattered knight cries out that it is far too late to fix anything tense. Tears streaming down his face, he agonizingly roars that no comforting words will ever bring his family back. Driven entirely mad by his loss, Atra vows to slaughter the villagers and every single person in the country. Watching the knight's complete mental collapse, Ray prepares himself for the inevitable clash. Realizing words are now useless, Ray steels his resolve to forcefully stop the rampaging guardian. With a fierce and determined shout, the tragic battle between the two warriors officially begins. Flashing back to a more peaceful past, Atra begins recounting the quiet life he once shared with his beloved wife. Desiring to protect his sickly childhood friend, he reveals that she was his sole motivation for seeking holy power. He recalls his absolute determination to survive the deadly trials and claim the massive strength required to keep her safe. Taking a sacred vow, he promised to use his newfound abilities exclusively to defend his loved ones. Pushing through the agonizing tests, Atra proudly integrated the divine energy and successfully earned his knightly title. His life felt perfectly complete when they were eventually blessed with a beautiful boy and girl. Holding his precious family, he silently swore to protect their smiling faces at absolutely any cost. A dark shadow soon crept over his memories as he notes that their peaceful joy was tragically short-lived. His devastating turning point arrived when a superior abruptly ordered him to become a divine tree keeper. The crushing weight of the mandatory reassignment completely shattered his idyllic family life. Forced to comply with the harsh orders, Atra was deployed far away to the remote and isolated Vajin village. He bitterly realized that living separately meant he would entirely miss watching his beloved children grow up. To make matters worse, he learned his mandatory service would last 10 years and likely lead to another distant deployment. Isolated from his true reason for fighting, Atra slowly began to question the purpose of his immense strength. His worst nightmare suddenly manifested when news arrived that his family's town had been viciously attacked by monsters. Reviewing the aftermath, he tragically discovered that his family's names were missing from the official survivor list. Numb with shock, he struggled to process the surreal nightmare while painfully accepting its harsh reality. Digging deeper into the tragedy, Atra soon uncovered horrifying facts regarding the knight's true mission during the attack. He discovered the royal government cynically used the small town as a bloody practice ground to train disposable new recruits. Atra explains that he learned this twisted truth directly from two dispatched knights who managed to survive the massacre. Unaware of Atra's origins, the cowardly survivors openly bragged that they only lived because they abandoned the townsfolk and ran away. Sickeningly, the knights gloated that they valued their own lives far more than the civilians they were sworn to protect. Simmering with undetectable murderous rage, Atra coldly agreed with the arrogant cowards right before snapping. Reflecting on his past, he laments that he put his life on the line and survived countless deadly situations just to protect his beloved family. A sinister cracking sound echoes as his fragile heart slowly begins to break. Recalling the tragic day of the subjugation, he coldly admits to letting 2 holy knights die at the hands of the werewolves. As for the other 2 holy knights who somehow managed to survive in the town, their fate was even worse. Staring with hollow eyes, he reveals that he personally murdered the remaining survivors. Horrified by this gruesome confession, the listener stammers and asks why he would commit such a betrayal. The listener frantically demands to know why he killed them. Desperate to understand how he could slaughter his own friends, staring back with dead eyes, he flatly denies that they were ever his friends. He grimly clarifies that after a certain turning point, those knights became his sworn enemies. He explains that Alfurk, one of the 4 deadly demons and boss of the werewolves, approached him using a familiar petitioner. The demon tempted him with a dark alliance, claiming their shared goal was to bring absolute chaos and destroy the corrupted kingdom. Succumbing to the darkness, he teamed up with Alfurk and began plotting to completely destroy his own village. By slowly letting werewolves infiltrate and kidnap villagers when no one was looking, he calculated that the village would eventually cease to exist. He pauses bitterly to reflect on the devastating reality of his dark ambition. He reveals that this horrific massacre was his ultimate plan to finally break free from the divine treekeeper curse. Despite his growing guilt and regret with every abducted villager, his messy heart simply could not force him to stop. Alfurk's demonic voice constantly echoed in his mind, manipulating his thoughts and pushing him further into madness. Completely lost regarding his true purpose, he admits he is trapped in a situation he can no longer escape on his own. Spiraling into despair, he questions if the only way out is to brutally end absolutely everything. He wonders what will even be left of his soul if he slaughters all the villagers just to obtain his freedom. Breaking down in pure agony, he desperately begs for anyone to tell him what his purpose for fighting even is anymore. Realizing the futility of his pleas, he acknowledges that even if someone gave him the answer, it would not change his tragic reality. Tears fall as he fully accepts the crushing truth that his beloved family will never return to him. A frantic voice desperately screams out a warning that the area outside is still far too dangerous. Terrified for her children's safety, a panicked mother frantically cries out the names of Liz and Shu. The chaotic tension breaks as a sudden, determined figure swiftly steps forward into the danger. Recognizing their miraculous savior, the stunned mother gasps Rage's name in sheer, breathless relief. A massive, Overwhelming fluctuation of raw magical power violently floods the surrounding battlefield. A deafening hum rapidly vibrates through the air as intense energy furiously gathers around the imposing figure. Reeling from the crushing pressure, an unseen enemy grunts in heavy pain just before being forcefully grabbed. A sharp whoosh of displaced air echoes loudly as a blindingly fast martial arts maneuver is ruthlessly executed. The heavy battlefield erupts in sudden shock as an incredibly unexpected and devastating physical strike lands. Shockwaves violently ripple through the immediate area as the sheer force of the brutal impact fully connects. Blurring with absolute, terrifying speed, the fierce martial arts exchange leaves absolutely no defensive openings for a counterattack. The relentless and highly calculated barrage of strikes continues to entirely dominate the chaotic skirmish. Every single precise movement perfectly overwhelms the powerful opposition with horrifying efficiency. Watching from a safe distance, an unseen observer stares at the absolute physical dominance unfolding in stunned silence. The awestruck observer mentally notes that this flawless combination of dense magic and masterful martial arts completely overwhelms every strong person they have ever known. Chuckling in sheer disbelief, the onlooker realizes the boy is an absolute monster, and fondly remembers instantly knowing he was entirely extraordinary. The intense scene abruptly shifts to Atra as the towering warrior begins radiating a deeply powerful, glowing aura. Deep lore reveals that the formidable Atra proudly holds the highly prestigious diamond rank as an elite holy knight. Despite outclassing the werewolves, Atra's immense divine power actually elevates his true combat capabilities to the even higher ruby rating. Deducing that Atra's divine strength stems directly from a fierce love for his family, Ray silently wonders exactly how to handle the grieving knight. Glaring furiously at the young mage, Atra aggressively demands to know why Ray is suddenly hesitating in the middle of a deathmatch. Screaming in absolute, desperate rage, the holy knight passionately challenges Ray to finally kill him so everything can permanently end. Raising his heavy weapon high, Atra rapidly channels a devastating amount of raw, explosive energy into his gleaming blade. Staring down the heavily armed, suicidal knight, Ray softly murmurs Atra's name in quiet, tragic disbelief. Frustrated by the incredibly grim situation, Ray forcefully clicks his tongue and fully braces for the incoming, lethal assault. Summoning extreme elemental wrath, Atra fiercely commands the trapped Spirit King of Flames to unleash its deeply angry fire. The raging knight violently roars for the blazing inferno, to mercilessly scorch and burn absolutely everything to useless ashes. Threatening complete annihilation, Atra viciously warns that the entire village will be permanently destroyed unless Ray finally fights him seriously. A colossal, roaring pillar of intensely hot fire violently erupts across the scorched battlefield. Watching the terrifying inferno aggressively consume the area, a horrified bystander desperately screams out Ray's name. As the thick smoke finally begins to clear, Atra completely freezes in sheer, unadulterated shock. The bewildered knight realizes in absolute horror that the frail-looking boy absorbed his ultimate, all-out attack completely unscathed. Calmly tapping his foot against the ruined earth, Ray casually activates a highly dense sphere of magic concentration. With a single, fiercely authoritative command, Ray instantly releases the massively compressed magical energy outward. Collapsing heavily to his knees in severe pain, Atra furiously demands to know why Ray foolishly wasted the perfect opportunity to finally kill him. Looking down at the broken man, Ray silently questions why a monstrously powerful knight would needlessly team up with werewolves instead of simply destroying the village himself. The young mage sharply recalls Atra's highly desperate, suicidal screams, passionately begging for an immediate death. Piecing the dark psychological puzzle together, a look of profound realization and absolute determination washes over Ray's face. Staring intensely at the defeated warrior, Ray mentally notes that the holy knight remains completely and utterly lost in his own suffocating despair. Gently, but firmly calling out to the grieving knight, Ray declares they must stop this pointless fight, resolving to continuously reach out until his words finally break through the darkness. A desperate voice argues that precious memories and people should never be reduced to ashes. Someone furiously screams to shut up as the other urges them to recall the faces and voices of those they love. The enraged figure violently declares that all these lingering feelings should just burn and disappear. A heavy physical impact violently shakes the immediate battlefield. A sharp, terrifying scream of pure agony suddenly pierces the chaotic air. Someone frantically screams Liana's name in sheer panic. Weak groans of pain echo softly through the devastating aftermath. Refusing to die here, the battered enemy violently curses and orders Atra to stall the man. The terrified mother desperately calls out for Shu and Liz. Shockingly, the enemy's body rapidly mutates as he unnaturally regenerates his severed arms and legs. The onlookers completely freeze. Realizing normal werewolves shouldn't possess this terrifying level of power, intense panic sets in as they realize the mutating monster is desperately attempting to escape the village. Realizing he moved too far from the gate while fighting, Ray curses that he won't catch the beast in time. Refusing to give up, Ray fiercely declares that this battle is not over yet. He urgently screams Atra's name across the ruined battlefield. Ray desperately asks the traitor if he has truly lost everything, and if no one else matters to him anymore. He fiercely demands to know if the warm affection Atra showed the children was nothing but a cruel lie. A tense silence heavily hangs in the air as the heavy words strike deep. The emotional weight of the confrontation forcefully forces Atra to pause. Ray passionately begs Atra to use his power to protect the remaining villagers and children like Shu and Liz. Gritting his teeth with newfound resolve, Atra quietly acknowledges the truth. Atra finally realizes his family wasn't his only treasure, vividly recalling the deep regret he felt as innocent villagers died. Channeling his surging emotions, Atra powerfully gathers intense energy into his glowing weapon. Warm memories of Shu, Liz, and the smiling villagers instantly flood his awakened mind. With blazing determination, Atra fiercely vows that these are the people he absolutely must protect. A sudden burst of rapid movement immediately kicks off the desperate final clash. Sprinting away, the mutating werewolf openly mocks Atra for throwing his spear with such terrible aim. The glowing spear violently cuts through the air on a seemingly erratic trajectory. Convinced of his escape, the beast laughs that there is absolutely no way the attack will hit him. Absolute terror strikes the beast as he realizes Atra intentionally threw the spear to manually activate the divine gate. The massive magical mechanisms violently ignite into action. With a deafening crash, the heavy gate doors rapidly begin to slam shut. The beast is completely trapped as the magical barrier violently seals his only exit. The devastating trap flawlessly executes, completely neutralizing the monstrous threat. A massive cloud of heavy dust violently explodes across the sealed entrance. A heavy, suffocating silence immediately descends over the newly secured village. The thick smoke slowly begins to clear from the ruined battlefield. The sturdy village walls stand tall, successfully protecting the innocent lives within. Exhausted but victorious, Atra quietly catches his breath. Bursting with joy, the relieved children happily rush toward their protective big brother. The terrified children cry out in sheer relief, intensely thanking their savior. Flustered by their gratitude, the bewildered rescuer stammers that he didn't actually do anything to deserve their profound thanks. Stepping forward with quiet authority, Ray offers a sincere and heartfelt expression of gratitude directly to Atra. Ray humbly admits his own grave mistake, confessing that his careless actions directly placed both of the innocent children in mortal danger. He solemnly acknowledges that without Atra activating the protective divine gate, he never would have been able to save Shu and Liz in time. Reinforcing the shattered knight's true worth, Ray firmly declares that Atra's strong will and protective feelings were what undoubtedly saved the day. Piercing through the knight's lingering despair, Ray gently asks if Atra has finally discovered his own true answer. A heavy, emotional silence completely settles over the devastated battlefield as the profound words slowly sink in. The weary knight slowly looks down at his hands, deeply processing the overwhelming weight of the recent events. All lingering tension fully dissipates from his stance as the surrounding air grows remarkably calm. Overcome with profound exhaustion and a deep sense of clarity, Atra quietly prepares to accept his ultimate truth. A gentle breeze sweeps through the ruined village square, signaling the absolute end of the intense confrontation. Breaking the long and heavy silence, Atra softly murmurs a word of absolute agreement. Bowing his head in peaceful acceptance, the weary knight quietly admits his own total and utter defeat. Admitting his crushing loss, the defeated warrior bows his head in absolute surrender. A heavy, solemn silence falls over the battlefield as the dust finally begins to settle. Approaching the fallen knight, Ray maintains a calm but resolute expression. Looking up at the young mage, the broken knight weakly calls out his name, apologizing for the immense trouble he caused. Atra expresses genuine relief that Ray finally found what he was looking for. Turning his attention away, Atra gently asks the children to go on ahead without him. Unaware of the grim reality, the cheerful kids wave goodbye and happily promise to see him later. Noticing Ray lingering behind, Atra looks back at him in quiet confusion. Explaining his grim fate, Atra reveals that the approaching holy knights will soon arrest him and drag him away to the royal capital. He expects to be locked away as a major offender in the inescapable forbidden dark abyss, managed by the Vidrador clan's elite barrier masters. Ray's eyes widen in sudden shock as a deeply familiar name strikes a nerve. A dark realization washes over Ray as he anticipates someone's cruel intentions. Detailing the prison's terrifying reputation, Atra explains that the king-appointed Vidrador clan has flawlessly guarded the indestructible fortress against multiple demon raids for centuries. Adding to the horror, the facility reportedly holds dangerous sealed monsters alongside an unimaginably terrifying SSS-rating beast locked deep within its walls. Highlighting the absolute finality of his sentence, Atra solemnly notes that anyone sent to the abyss will never see the light of day again. As Atra names it, the Cradle of Sin, Ray quietly reflects on the ominous involvement of the Vidrador clan. Ray briefly zones out while mentally recalling a past conversation with his former leader Loki. Returning to the present, Ray expresses deep regret that he didn't arrive sooner to prevent this horrific tragedy. Offering a weary smile, Atra tells the guilt-ridden boy not to worry about it. Dismissing the useless alternate scenarios, the fallen knight declares his intention to say a proper goodbye, since they will likely never meet again. Bowing his head in sincere gratitude, Atra wholeheartedly thanks the young mage. Emphasizing his immense relief, the knight praises Ray for ensuring he didn't lose his precious family this time around. Staring thoughtfully ahead, Ray acknowledges the heavy limitations of his newfound power. He solemnly accepts the harsh reality that ultimate magic cannot change the past or predict the uncertain future. Firmly resolving his purpose, Ray vows to strictly use Yggdrasil's power to save whoever can be saved in the present press. A sense of profound peace slowly washes over the ruined battlefield. Hearing this noble resolve, Atra offers a gentle and deeply satisfied smile. Looking down at a suddenly revealed fatal wound, Atra admits he entirely expected this grim outcome. Begging for one final selfish favor, the dying knight asks Ray to protect the village and falsely report that the werewolves were the ones who killed him. Collapsing heavily to the ground with a final thud, Atra leaves the young mage to process this massive deception. Understanding the critical stakes, Ray realizes that the villagers killing a divine treekeeper would guarantee their immediate execution. To spare the village from the kingdom's deadly wrath, Atra actively orchestrated his own cover story so everyone else could return to peace. Staring sadly at the fallen protector, Ray wonders if Atra truly realized the depth of the villagers' feelings. A grieving villager steps forward and addresses the dying divine gatekeeper directly. Barely clinging to life, the fallen knight weakly responds to the familiar voice. Weeping openly, the villager apologizes profusely for entirely failing to support him and allowing his crushing despair to corner him. Frantically rejecting their apology, Atra tearfully insists he is entirely to blame for the dozens of innocent lives sacrificed during the monstrous raid. Drowning in immense guilt, the broken warrior declares he will completely accept his death at their hands without a single complaint. Brushing aside his suicidal plea, the compassionate villager firmly clarifies that absolutely no one desires his execution. Acknowledging the harsh reality of their shared trauma, they frankly admit that while many villagers harbor deep hatred for the devastating losses, they still refuse to seek his blood. A sudden realization strikes as an unspoken caveat, completely shifts the tense atmosphere. Atra softly murmurs Shinoka's name. Deeply moved by her unexpected interjection, standing her ground, Shinoka bluntly declares that she can never forgive him for his horrific betrayal. She firmly explains that her lingering hatred will forever remain because he willingly cooperated with the monsters who murdered her husband. Despite her burning resentment, she pauses to acknowledge a complex and conflicting truth. She admits that his past efforts to protect the village and his recent rescue of Shu and Liz remain undeniable facts. Bowing deeply, Shinoka sincerely thanks him for saving her and the rest of the surviving villagers. Overwhelmed by her unexpected gratitude, Atra breaks down into raw, choked sobs. He stammers weakly, completely unable to form a coherent response through his heavy tears. Through his crushing guilt, he painfully realizes that he still has people who genuinely care about him. Bowed by the immense weight of his sins and their mercy, he offers a desperate, tearful apology. The villagers watch in somber silence as their former protector weeps openly on the battlefield. Confused by his intense sorrow, the innocent children gently call out to their beloved older brother figure. The heavy emotional tension slowly begins to settle over the recovering survivors. The quiet aftermath of the brutal conflict leaves the village bathed in a solemn, reflective peace. The narrator notes that their lingering trauma eventually became the crucial nourishment needed to move forward. While Liana enthusiastically calls out to Ray Rennie, rushing over to check his condition, she breathes a sigh of immense relief when Ray happily confirms he is completely unhurt. The narrator definitively concludes that both Atra and the battered villagers have finally begun to heal. The village chief suddenly approaches. Respectfully calling out to the weary traveler, bowing in profound gratitude, the chief admits he has absolutely no idea how to adequately thank Ray for saving them all. The chief warmly extends his thanks to Liana for bravely evacuating the villagers, though she modestly waves off his praise. Guilt-ridden, Liana stammers that she actually put the young children in grave danger, but the chief fiercely denies it. Offering genuine comfort, Ray gently pats his flustered companion on the head. He warmly praises her brave efforts, assuring her that she did exceptionally well during the crisis. Blushing with pride, Liana joyfully accepts his kind and validating words. Ray offers a soft, reassuring smile as the immediate crisis finally concludes. A commanding new voice suddenly cuts through the quiet, noting that their arrival seems entirely too late. A heavily armored cavalry unit dramatically rides into the secured village. Startled by the sudden intrusion, the villagers quickly turn to face the unexpected arrivals. The elite mounted knights confidently halt their massive steeds in the center of the ruined settlement. Recognizing the imposing leader, a villager murmurs in absolute awe. The imposing figure is revealed to be Captain Traumatized, the fierce leader of the King's Blue Dragon Division. Surveying the bloody aftermath, Traumatized grimly notes the undeniable presence of slaughtered werewolves. His sharp gaze suddenly lands on Ray, sparking a moment of intense curiosity. Ray stares back silently, cautiously assessing the powerful royal knight. Shifting his focus, the captain acknowledges Atra's survival with a sense of quiet familiarity. Dismounting his warhorse, Traumatized firmly requests a full report on the chaotic situation. Steeling his nerves, Atra respectfully agrees to explain the grim reality of what transpired. Listening intently to the grim tale, the captain solemnly processes the heavy information. Absorbing the horrific details, Traumatized finally grasps the full, devastating scope of the village's ordeal. The silent atmosphere hangs heavy as the characters reflect on the grim and chaotic state of the kingdom. Acknowledging the complex political situation, someone notes that many citizens are actively oppressed and pushed around by the kingdom's dire circumstances. The speaker reluctantly realizes that the other party will absolutely not change their mind, deciding that taking further action is unfortunately necessary. He firmly declares that he will escort Atra back to the royal capital so they can discuss the situation thoroughly upon arrival. Overcome with immense guilt, Atra softly apologizes for his tragic and destructive actions. Understanding Atra's desperate motives, the speaker points out that the fallen knight acted on his own twisted sense of justice and is now living on borrowed time. He coldly reminds Atra that death is not the only consequence, as he will be forced to slowly pay for his brutal crimes in a prison cell. The man casually mentions that this unexpected leniency is based on explicit information he recently heard from higher authorities. He explains that individuals possessing divine power are apparently completely exempt from the death penalty, regardless of their knightly status or the exact reasoning behind it. Turning his attention to Ray, he politely asks if the tired traveler wouldn't mind sharing his side of the chaotic events. Expressing his deep gratitude, the man reveals Atra told him that Ray single-handedly defeated both the 3 werewolves and the rampaging knight. He openly marvels at Ray's incredible combat abilities, entirely shocked that a mere white mage could fight so fiercely. Recognizing the young healer, he asks if Ray is the famous white mage named Ray Din Huel from the Gunkino Dongwa party. Ray's eyes widen in sheer disbelief, as he frantically wonders how this powerful stranger could possibly know his true identity. Seeking confirmation of his unbelievable combat strength, the stranger repeats his question to verify if the young man truly is just a white mage. Startled by Ray's total confusion, the man suddenly realizes that the young traveler has absolutely no idea who he is. Chuckling at his own oversight, the stranger quickly admits he completely forgot to introduce himself. Standing tall, he proudly introduces himself as Traumatized, a ruby-rank captain of the Blue Dragon Division of the King's Knights Army. Intimidated by the captain's high status, a flustered Ray nervously stammers out a respectful greeting in return. Traumatized explains that Holy Knights occasionally collaborate with elite adventurer parties, allowing him to easily memorize the faces of high-ranking members. Internally amazed by the captain's flawless memory, Ray realizes that any public information about him must be at least 5 years old. Traumatized casually reveals that Gunkino Dongwa was recently promoted to S-Rank last month, making them famous enough for any Holy Knight to immediately recognize. Noticing Ray's utter confusion, the captain asks if the young healer mistakenly believed his old party was still stuck at A-Rank. Ray solemnly corrects the captain, carefully explaining that he is no longer affiliated with Gunkino Dongwa. Traumatized quietly processes this unexpected revelation with a thoughtful hum. Piecing the timeline together, the captain realizes Ray must be completely unaware of the recent tragic accident that befell his former party inside a dungeon. Traumatized explains that the party encountered a deadly S-rating monster, resulting in everyone except their new white mage suffering heavy wounds that currently require intense treatment. A heavy, suffocating silence falls over Ray as he absorbs the devastating news about his former comrades. The familiar name of his old party echoes hollowly in his mind as dark memories begin to resurface. He struggles to mentally process the shocking revelation that Loki and the rest of the arrogant group were so brutally injured. Recalling the bitter anger of his banishment, Ray reminds himself that he cut off all emotional ties to them and simply wants to focus entirely on finding Nenemoa. Despite his logical resolve to leave the painful past behind, the tragic news clearly begins to weigh heavily on his conscience. Clutching his chest, he reluctantly admits to himself that his feelings regarding their brutal downfall are incredibly complicated. Breaking the tense silence, Traumatized curiously asks why such a talented white mage would ever leave a top-tier party to become a wandering traveler. Ray awkwardly clarifies that he was actually banished for being totally useless, claiming his self-taught magic isn't proper healing. Utterly dumbfounded by this absurd claim, Traumatized loudly questions how anyone could possibly consider Ray to be useless. Hesitating briefly, the captain admits he probably shouldn't voice his true, unfiltered thoughts on the matter. unable to hold back. Traumatized bluntly declares that the party members must be completely blind to banish someone with Rei's immense skill. Utterly bewildered by the captain's incredibly high praise, Rei begins to question what the knight truly means. Traumatized simply lets out a knowing chuckle, leaving the completely confused healer to ponder his true worth. A cheerful voice excitedly calls out to Rei, asking to grab him because they desperately want to consult about something. Startled by the sudden proposal, Rei reacts in utter shock as the man asks him to join the elite Blue Dragon Division due to his rare ability to fight and heal. Staring back with a deadpan expression, Rei silently judges the impulsive and reckless recruitment attempt. Amused by Rei's skeptical glare, the recruiter casually acknowledges that he probably shouldn't scout people without careful consideration. Sog inwardly reflects that the King's Knight's army possesses massive authority, leading many of its privileged members to behave in a highly arrogant manner. Remembering that Captain Traumatized is the second highest ruby rank, Rei concludes that this high-ranking holy knight is refreshingly different from the usual elitists who look down on adventurers. Leaning in warmly, Captain Traumatized extends a small pouch toward the healer and insists that he take it. Rei stares in sheer surprise as the captain reveals the pouch contains 300 gold coins, a massive reward for subjugating the werewolves. Explaining that the coins can be exchanged at the bank, Traumatized cheerfully points out that the funds will be incredibly useful for Rei's upcoming trip to the royal capital. Feeling deeply uncomfortable with the fortune, Rei humbly suggests using the funds to rebuild the destroyed village instead. Insisting he didn't fight for a reward, bursting into hearty laughter, Traumatized praises Rei's incredible kindness and loudly declares he likes the young man even more now. Flustered by the overwhelming enthusiasm and booming laughter, Rei awkwardly tries to interject. Traumatized waves off Rei's selfless concerns, explaining that rebuilding the village, finding a new divine tree keeper, and repairing the divine gate are strictly knight duties. Surprised to learn the knights also handle technical repairs, Rei listens as Traumatized explains that forcefully activating the gate made it highly unstable. Bowing his head in deep gratitude, Rei thanks Captain Traumatized, though the beaming captain insists the thanks should go the other way around. Looking at Rei with profound respect, Traumatized marvels at how the young man miraculously managed to stop Atra without taking his life. Pushing the pouch of coins closer, the captain earnestly requests Rei to accept it as a sincere token of his personal appreciation. Yielding to the captain's overwhelming sincerity, Rei thankfully accepts the reward while asking him to take good care of the village. Brimming with renewed energy, Traumatized claps his hands together and excitedly announces the official start of the village's reconstruction. Calling out to Rei, Atra suddenly approaches and states he needs to ask for more details regarding the demon who pulled him to the dark side. Looking sharply at Traumatized, Atra insists that the captain needs to stick around and hear this crucial information as well. Atra drops a massive revelation, ominously identifying the manipulator as Alfurk, one of the infamous four deadly demons. Traumatized absorbs the dark news, grimly acknowledging that this terrifying entity was the one who pulled Atra into his horrific betrayal. Groaning in sheer frustration, the captain visibly stresses over the horrific realization that they are dealing with the four deadly demons of all things. A tense, suffocating silence falls over the group as the terrifying weight of the legendary title fully sinks in. Traumatized explains that these trusted subordinates of the Demon Lord are also known as the Four Knights of the Demon Realm, noting they are all monstrous SSS rating threats. Atra clarifies that he only ever met Alfurk's familiar, shuddering as he recalls how he completely lost control of his emotions the moment they made contact. Piecing the puzzle together, Rei realizes the familiar amplified Atra's hatred, showcasing a terrifying ability to manipulate emotions and break minds. Staring intently at Atra, Rei asks the man why he specifically decided to share this highly dangerous information with him. With a grave expression, Atra issues a dire warning, revealing that the powerful demon is now specifically targeting Rei. Explaining the depth of the threat, Atra reveals that Alfurk ordered the werewolves to leave Rei alone because he viewed the young mage as a major hindrance to his plans. Narrowing his eyes, Rei calmly processes the dire warning without a single trace of fear. Flabbergasted by Rei's completely unfazed reaction, Traumatized frantically points out that the enemy is a literal SSS rating monster. Unbothered, Rei calmly thanks Atra for the information, noting that it finally makes sense why he constantly felt someone watching him. Rei casually admits he had already deduced that a high-ranking demon was observing him from the shadows. Committing the demon's name to memory, Rei silently prepares himself for an inevitable clash with Alfurk of the four deadly demons. Meanwhile, in a completely different location, panicking servants desperately scream for the master and the doctor because a heavily injured patient has finally awakened. Thrashing wildly in bed, Himeno screams in pure terror, begging someone to light a candle because she hates the darkness and her missing arm is in agony. A terrified maid frantically tries to calm her lady down, begging the hysterical Himeno to simply listen to reason. Confused by the maid's strange statement about it being morning, Himeno stammers and demands they light something so they can talk. The maid begins to cry, forcing Himeno to question what she is saying, as the servant insists the room is already bright. Trembling with sudden dread, Himeno reaches up to touch her scarred face and slowly asks why her world is so incredibly dark. The maid breaks down completely, delivering the crushing news that Himeno permanently lost both of her eyes during their disastrous dungeon exploration. Violently denying reality, Himeno thrashes around in absolute agony, screaming for someone to heal her broken body and flatly refusing to accept her blindness. A haunting flashback violently invades her mind, revealing the twisted, mocking smile of the undead terror that utterly destroyed her arrogant party. Broken and completely consumed by despair, the once proud sword saintess pathetically gasps out Rei's name. Reduced to a weeping, helpless shell of her former self, Himeno desperately begs the healer she once abandoned to come and save her. A sweeping view establishes the vast, bright sky above the traveling carriage. Continuing their steady journey, the carriage rolls forward along the dusty road. Breaking the silence, Liana excitedly alerts Rei that their destination is finally within sight. Catching her infectious energy, Rei immediately looks forward to see the view. Towering majestically ahead, the grand walls of the sprawling royal capital finally appear. Vice Captain Miliana informs them they can now freely enter through the east gate. Feeling guilty, Liana nervously asks if forcefully registering their magic signatures was truly okay. Smiling awkwardly, Miliana admits bypassing protocol is strictly reserved for high-ranking knights. She explains the highly stubborn Captain Traumatized simply took a strong liking to them. Brushing off their concerns, Miliana graciously accepts Rei's profound gratitude for the ride. Reflecting on the timeline, the vice captain notes she didn't expect to see them so soon. Glancing back, Rei quietly agrees as his mind flashes back to yesterday's events. He recalls departing the village immediately after concluding their tense discussions. Miraculously, they coincidentally bumped into Captain Traumatized on the road this very morning. Eager for company, the cheerful captain aggressively invited them to share his carriage. Rei reflects that this highly fortunate encounter got them to the capital so fast. While being dragged away, Teraz tells Rei to always rely on the Blue Dragon division. Dragged by frustrated troops, the energetic captain shouts that Liana is always welcome too. Flustered by the farewell, Liana stammers as Rei casually suggests they finally head inside. Stepping through the massive gates, they officially leave the dangerous wilderness behind. Navigating the stone archways, they fully enter the bustling heart of the royal domain. The grand capital architecture instantly surrounds them with its overwhelming scale. Liana marvels at the lively streets, while Rei quietly notes how deeply nostalgic it feels. Looking around, Rei silently reflects it has been 5 years since he last visited his cranings. He internally marvels at his return, recalling his past lack of desire to leave Vandrasil. Snapping out of his thoughts, he remembers Liana previously visited for official training. Scanning the crowded street, Rei quickly spots Liana standing perfectly still amidst the chaos. He gently calls out her name, noticing her captivated by the vibrant surroundings. Asking if she wants to go somewhere, he watches her point at an information board. Liana shyly explains everything feels new because her strict training never allowed free roaming. Her eyes sparkle as she admits she never knew the capital contained so many stores. She watches the diverse crowds completely fill the stone streets with endless energy. The massive scale of the royal city truly dawns on her breathtakingly sense. Sensing her suppressed excitement, Rei cheerfully suggests they go sightseeing together. Taken completely aback, Liana stammers nervously and quickly averts her anxious gaze. Gripping her clothes tightly, she firmly refuses to be a useless burden to him. Desperately considerate, she argues he shouldn't waste his precious time solely on her. Analyzing her reaction, Rei realizes overt kindness would only cause her immense stress. Changing tactics, he commands her to accompany him strictly to carry his belongings. Falling for the ruse, Liana eagerly agrees while Rei smiles at his clever success. Breaking the silence, a voice eagerly asks if the other person still remembers their special promise. A sudden flash of realization hits, as they recall the exact promise to eat sweet food upon finally reaching the capital. Stuttering with intense excitement, they emphatically confirm that they definitely remember the plan. Brimming with enthusiasm, they quickly agree to grab some delicious sweet food right after they finish their shopping. The conversation briefly pauses as they continue navigating through the bustling commercial district. Taking in their surroundings, the duo silently makes their way through the busy streets of the massive capital. The visual narrative focuses on their steady progression past the various colorful vendor stalls. Their attention shifts toward finding the specific shops needed to supply their upcoming travels. The quiet moment allows them to fully absorb the lively and vibrant atmosphere of the city. Stepping into a nearby clothing boutique, they shift their focus to acquiring suitable attire. The interior of the store offers a brief respite from the busy crowds walking outside. A moment of anticipation builds as new garments are carefully selected from the racks. The scene slowly transitions as the fitting process begins in the back of the shop. Ray nervously asks if he looks weird, prompting Liana to enthusiastically assure him that his dashing new outfit, chosen by the clerk, looks very good on him. Flushing slightly at her genuine praise, Ray internally admits that her heartfelt compliments are actually quite embarrassing. Regaining his composure, he firmly tells the clerk that he understands and will definitely take the outfit. The clerk politely asks if he would prefer to wear the new clothes exactly as they are, right out of the store. A brief moment of quiet contemplation passes, as he silently considers the clerk's convenient offer. Startled by a sudden thought, Ray immediately turns his attention back to Liana and calls her name. He excitedly announces that it is finally her turn to receive some proper equipment next. Completely caught off guard by his generosity, Liana stammers and asks if he is truly sure about this purchase. Ray gently explains that she needs a sword that matches her skills, especially since she bought so many other things and her old weapon from the village chief suffered a crack. Gripped by a sudden wave of insecurity, Liana painfully reflects on how she felt. She could not help at all during the recent crisis. Flashing back to the village attack before they met Captain Terrazid, she heavily blames herself for letting the innocent children experience such horrors and failing to protect Liz from injury. Finally expressing her suppressed feelings, she confesses that despite her extensive magical and physical training, she completely froze in terror when the werewolf appeared right in front of her. The narrative somberly notes that no amount of accumulated training can truly prepare someone for the suffocating pressure of a real battle, where one wrong step means instant death. Calling her name gently, Ray reassures her that experiencing such raw fear is a completely natural reaction for anyone. Recognizing her intense internal frustration, he deeply understands that she is terribly vexed by her own perceived weakness. He notices her tightly gripping the leftover sword from the village chief, recognizing it as a profound symbol of her burning will to change her fate. Staring into her resolute eyes, he listens as she tearfully declares how much she utterly despises herself for being unable to do anything. Gazing back at her, Ray clearly sees the unyielding spirit of a kind, hard-working girl, shining brightly through her tears, offering a comforting and steady presence. He softly tells her that he completely understands her pain. A sudden spark of profound realization visibly brightens her tearful expression as she looks up. Stepping forward with absolute conviction, Ray firmly promises that he will personally teach her exactly how to fight. The narrator reveals that during their journey to the capital, Ray trained Liana after noticing her outstanding offensive qualities and solid grasp of the combat basics. He analytically notes that her combat foundation is incredibly solid, but she suffers from one critical, lingering flaw. He identifies that paralyzing fear unconsciously forces her to turn her gaze away from opponents, drastically slowing down her reaction time in combat. Confident in her massive potential, he believes she just needs to actively apply the specific fighting techniques he taught her. Ray firmly concludes that if she can just learn to control that lingering fear, she will undoubtedly grow incredibly strong. Snapping back to the present, Liana happily devours a delicious, very sweet dessert, proving she possesses the inner strength to eventually face an A-rating monster. Delighting in her first bite of a parfait, Liana marvels at how incredibly delicious the sweet treat tastes. She happily notes that it almost feels like a waste to eat something that looks so cute. Suddenly catching herself, she flusters and apologizes for getting entirely too caught up in the fun. Ray gently reassures her that it is perfectly okay to enjoy herself, adding that seeing her have fun makes him much happier. A quiet, heartwarming silence falls over the table as Liana processes his deep kindness. Staring at him with a gentle expression, she softly murmurs his name. She admits that watching him effortlessly treat Liz's injuries earlier served as a powerful reminder of how truly amazing his healing magic is. Ray casually explains, he simply noticed a crack in the young girl's spine using his aura and immediately repaired it. Liana points out that normal healing spells generally only accelerate the body's natural recovery speed by enhancing its self-healing ability. She notes his magic acts entirely differently, instantly erasing injuries as if he literally turned back time, a feat even the great saint cannot perform. Lost in deep thought, Ray quietly repeats her phrase about turning back time. He quickly deduces that Liana must have exceptionally good eyes and the ability to read his aura flow to reach such a highly accurate conclusion. Impressed by her sharp observation, he decides to trust her and prepares to explain the true nature of his magic. Before he can speak, a dark memory of Norn flashes in his mind, harshly reminding him that his ability is completely different and is not actually healing in puss. In the flashback, his mentor explicitly warns him never to reveal his true power, as doing so would instantly make him a massive target for both the kingdom and the demons. Noticing his sudden, tense silence, a confused Liana nervously calls out to him. She anxiously asks if something is wrong or if she said something overly strange. Snapping out of his dark memories, Ray quickly apologizes and tells her to simply forget he said anything. He silently reflects on the rigorous training normal white mages must typically undergo. He notes they are strictly required to enroll in a specialized academy, pass practical exams, and officially register with the guild. Because he was picked up by Loki and learned magic entirely through isolated self-study, Ray realizes he has absolutely no idea what normal healing actually looks like. Blissfully unaware of his own abnormality, he had continuously pumped massive amounts of aura into his spells under the false assumption that his method was completely normal. Shifting the mood, Liana brightly thanks him for the dessert, while Ray humbly apologizes for dragging her around all day. He bashfully admits they kept getting lost simply because the massive capital has changed so drastically over the past 5 years. Flashing a radiant smile, Liana immediately reassures him that exploring all the new places with him was genuinely fun. Gripping a wrapped package tightly, she takes a deep breath and gathers her resolve, excitedly referencing the expensive new sword he just bought her. She enthusiastically promises to grow stronger and finally prove her usefulness. Touched by her fierce determination, Ray smiles and nods in warm agreement. Looking at his dedicated new companion, he softly thanks her for everything. The peaceful moment is instantly shattered when a shocked, disembodied voice suddenly utters a curse of sheer disbelief. The unseen figure stammers in absolute shock, recognizing the unmistakable white hair standing right in front of them. The perspective shifts to reveal a towering, muscular man glaring directly at the young healer. Sensing the heavy gaze, Ray slowly turns his head to confront the sudden intrusion. Staring in wide-eyed disbelief, the hulking brute demands to know if the boy before him is truly Ray. Ray's eyes widen as he instantly recognizes the imposing man, softly whispering the name of his former teammate Suglenst. Recognizing a familiar face, Ray silently states Suglenst's name. Sweating in pure shock, Suglenst furiously questions why the boy is still alive. A flashback reveals their elite party challenged the hardest SSS-Rank dungeon 5 years ago. Realizing they were completely outmatched, the party cowardly decided to escape using teleport stones. Desperate to save a highly valuable teleport stone, they intentionally left a member behind. They seized the perfect opportunity to secretly banish Ray to simply dispose of him. Despite abandoning the useless white mage, Suglenst realizes his victim miraculously survived. Noting Ray's drastically changed vibe, Suglenst frantically wonders why he is in the capital. He bitterly glares at the boy he once deemed a completely useless teammate. Sweating profusely, the terrified warrior realizes this unexpected survival is incredibly bad for him. If Ray reveals their betrayal, Suglenst will entirely lose his position and face banishment. He panics that Himeno and Loki will also face absolute ruin if their crime surfaces. Knowing Loki is battling higher-ups, Suglenst resolves to violently avoid any more trouble. Staring maliciously, the corrupted warrior firmly decides there is only one thing left to do. Masking his dark intent, Suglenst approaches Ray and praises his miraculous survival. Feigning friendliness after 5 years, the warrior aggressively invites Ray to accompany him. A dark, murderous urge completely consumes Suglenst as he resolves to kill the boy. Staring back, Ray internally sighs that this unexpected encounter is highly troublesome. Knowing Suglenst's volatile personality, Ray realizes the man might cause a massive public scene. Ray recalls Captain Terazed's mentioning that Gunkino Donghua members sustained highly serious injuries recently. Analyzing his opponent, Ray deduces Suglenst probably escaped with only light wounds. Noticing the heavy tension, an anxious Liana quietly asks Ray about his relationship with Suglenst. Masking the grim truth, Ray gently apologizes and falsely claims the man is just an acquaintance. The tense trio silently navigates through the winding, desolate back alleys of the capital. Stopping abruptly in a shady area, Suglenst loudly announces they have finally arrived. Gesturing around, the sinister warrior claims this old training ground should feel highly nostalgic. Mocking Ray's past weakness, Suglenst notes the surrounding scrap metal is highly convenient right now. Listening to the thinly veiled threats, Ray easily deduces that Suglenst fully intends to kill him. Ray observes that this isolated slum serves perfectly as the royal capital's fiery dumping ground. Assessing the desolate environment, he grimly notes it is the absolute perfect place to dispose of a corpse. Suglenst sadistically reminisces about violently disciplining Ray while internally fearing the boy will expose their betrayal. Hearing the cruel boast, Liana repeats the word with a deep, sickening sense of dread. Ray silently remembers being brutally used as a living punching bag for their twisted amusement. Maintaining his calm composure, the young mage silently contemplates his next strategic move. Arrogantly, taking credit for Ray's survival, Suglenst mocks him as a barely functional white mage. Cutting through the arrogant boasting, Ray coldly and firmly calls out his former abuser's name, offering a peaceful out. Ray promises to stay silent and bluntly asks to be left alone. Glaring furiously at the calm boy, Suglenst violently scoffs at the unexpected rejection. Leaning in with sheer malice, the hulking warrior aggressively accuses Ray of becoming too cocky. A terrifying, murderous rage completely contorts Suglenst's face as he prepares to brutally strike Liana, stammers weakly, desperately struggling to find her voice in the highly tense situation. Finding her courage, she urgently pleads for the violent confrontation to stop completely. Ray immediately looks back in surprise. Worriedly calling out his companion's name, Suglinst angrily barks at the troubled woman to get lost, visibly annoyed by her sudden interference. Ignoring the massive brute, Ray frantically checks on Liana and asks if she is all right. Suglinst menacingly interrupts the tender moment, declaring he has one very important thing to tell Ray him. He coldly states that he will absolutely ignore any pathetic pleas for mercy during their fight. Ray grimly realizes that his former comrade is no longer even trying to conceal his intense desire to kill him. Trying to protect his companion, Ray sternly demands that Suglinst leave Liana out of this conflict forever. Suglinst suddenly bursts into a mocking, heavily suppressed laugh that quickly escalates. Breaking into a manic cackle, Suglinst cruelly declares that Ray will die here anyway, making his protective demand completely meaningless. He leans in with pure malice, loudly promising to violently kill the lowly healer. Unfazed by the heavy threat, Ray calmly questions if Suglinst truly believes he is capable of killing him. Enraged by the sheer defiance, Suglinst warns Ray not to think his impending death will be quick or painless. He sadistically outlines his brutal plan, promising to violently sever Ray's arm first to ensure maximum suffering. Ray stares back in absolute stony silence as the hulking warrior prepares to launch his devastating assault. Suglinst furiously warns the weakling not to look down on him as he initiates a blindingly fast physical movement. In an instant, Ray casually sidesteps the attack and firmly taps Suglinst on the back. Asking if he finally understands the gap in their power, Ray coldly informs the stunned warrior that he is completely incapable of inflicting a lethal blow against him. Driven into a total frenzy, Suglinst screams that he won't hold back anymore and prepares to unleash his absolute full power to slaughter the lowly slave. A massive, explosive aura of sheer physical force violently erupts from Suglinst's towering frame. Ray analytically notes Suglinst's signature move, Charge, which uses extraordinary strength to instantly adjust trajectory and guarantee a direct hit. Despite the terrifying incoming attack, Ray remains perfectly calm and composed in the face of absolute danger. He quickly deduces that simply destroying Suglinst's weapon will completely neutralize the otherwise devastating combat maneuver. To Ray's absolute shock, the berserk warrior suddenly alters his violent trajectory mid-flight. Realizing the grave danger, Ray gasps in horror as he sees Suglinst cowardly target the defenseless Liana instead. Liana's legs completely freeze in absolute terror as the massive, unavoidable attack bears down on her. She screams in pure agony as a brutal strike lands, prompting Ray to frantically shout her name across the battlefield. A dense, chaotic cloud of heavy dust violently kicks up from the devastating physical impact. Standing victoriously over the wreckage, Suglinst menacingly calls out to the panicked healer. The sadistic warrior reveals he decided to have fun, torturing the woman first, because simply killing Ray was far too boring. He cruelly orders the helpless healer to just stand there and watch the incoming. Merciless brutality. Suddenly, an elderly butler smoothly steps into the fray, politely offering his hollow apologies. The butler, Gusai, calmly informs Ray that the enraged Suglinst cannot be stopped when he enters this mindless berserk state. Gusai coldly reminds Ray that as a mere slave, he absolutely cannot afford to offend the prestigious Daidanese family by interfering. Exhaling calmly, the imposing butler suggests they take things slowly while physically blocking Ray's path to his injured companion. He sinisterly warns that once Suglinst finishes playing with Liana, Ray will inevitably be next. A terrifying, incredibly dark aura suddenly explodes outward from Ray's previously restrained and calm body. Radiating absolute, murderous fury, Ray commands the interfering butler to lift his barrier